What's up world? It's Willy What If here with the next part in your favorite series. Sorry for the delay, I had to fix a few things behind the scenes, so hopefully the quality and quantity of videos will only improve. This is part 11 of What If Deku Gave Up on Being a Hero. Thanks for all the support, and if you want to see more leave a like and comment below. Now let's begin. Part 11. It had been another day without a word from Ochako, and Izuku was becoming slightly concerned, but he gave the woman space like Himiko suggested. It was Friday and he had just gotten off his shift, and thankfully nothing bothered him when he clocked out. Kachan hadn't called him up or stolen his time. Sato didn't request his help early. His mother was still radio silent, which bothered him less and less, and his manager kept the workload light today. Granted, his coworkers were planning on going for a bar, but he opted out of that like he always did. The only thing left was to tear his shackles off and go see Himiko, which made him more than a little excited. He wasn't sure what was up with himself, but he had missed her, to such a point that he thought about her whenever a spare moment came around. Then again, he was grimy and tired with nothing else going on that wasn't laborious in some way. Sure, he was more than grateful for the challenges since they brought meaning to his life, but it wore him out, and all he wanted was to lay back in her arms and melt away in the softness of her grasp. A smile crossed his lips when he recalled perfectly how abrasive her palms and fingers were and how they dug into his skin, along with scratching the surface of his scars just right. Suddenly he was brought back to how chapped and dry her lips always were, and how she would nibble on his tongue when they kissed in these little fits of mischief just to make him wince. Of course he'd pay her back by slipping his hands in her waistband and feeling up her rear. She'd freeze and glare half-heartedly, but he'd push and she let him win. There was also the way her body curled around him, with the two of them just enjoying the silence and each other's company under a blanket that kept the cold away. Himiko would be wrapped up as she placed her head on his shoulder while he rubbed her sides, listening to her breathe and sigh while the whole world faded away and it was just the two of them in their lair. His smile grew as more things came to mind. Small things like the smell of her hair, the way she raised her left eyebrow when she got confused, how her fangs tended to jut out ever so slightly if she yawned, and how her mouth looked rather cute when it was stained red. He knew it was a strange idea, but the things she did on a daily basis didn't faze him anymore. If anything, they almost endeared her to him more. He had spent more than 6 months waking up beside the woman and seeing her drowsy and cranky right as she boiled a gallon of crimson for the day right next to him, using the toaster while they talked about whatever. Hell, he had found himself actually enjoying the scent of copper and iron in the air, relaxing almost. After all, it was part and parcel of the most comfortable place on earth for him, and the more he thought about the fact, he also found himself drawn to memories of her using those fangs on him. Incidentally, he found himself having to sit down at what those scenes did to him. How close she was and how much her breath muddled right into his ear. It wasn't so much the pain itself that did it, but more how it was a signal, a sign of what would come after. Izuku knew it was strange to think like that, but the feelings were so damn hard to separate. She was so lovely and kind, and yet her teeth were so sharp, and she smiled the most when his blood was on them, and she made him see heaven. It had gotten so bad that he would get aroused when she smiled in that nasty way that was a little too large and displayed them, and the worst part was that she knew it. She never openly addressed it, but her eyes glowed with such pride that it struck him like a cord. A huff came from him, fueled by impatience and desire. Right, wrong, he didn't really care. They were partners and nobody else was involved, so it was purely between them, and all he wanted to his core was to see her again. It hung over him like a shadow and made him grit his teeth as those desires flared. He was a fool, he knew, but it was a foolishness that made him drunk with joy, intoxicated on her essence and energy to the point he'd drink an ocean and it never be enough. A crack came from his knuckles as he clenched his fists reflexively over and over as a deep hunger ate at him. It attacked him like an animal, and he loved it as he pictured the endless things they could do together, how badly he needed her like a narcotic. A shake overtook him for a brief second as the anticipation mounted. Looking up, he saw that it was his stop, so stepping out and making his way to Himiko's apartment complex while avoiding any stupid situations like she taught him, he was inside the building. Moments later he was standing before her front door and knocked 3 times like he had gotten into the habit of. A few seconds later locks were undone and the door slowly swung back as the object of his affections appeared in those same crusty fleece pants and gray tee, with a long-bladed tanto knife in hand, her long blonde hair draped carelessly down that it rested by her knees. The golden of her eyes perked up at seeing him, the purple bags under them dancing slightly as her lips peeled back into a smile. But she paused when she managed to get a moment longer to look at him, and her warm, inviting smile shrank to something more teasing. She knew what was on his mind, and he loved that about her. With a soft lunge when the knife was pointed firmly away from him, the villainess entrapped him in a hug, letting the pleasure at his want show. "You miss me, Zuzu?" Inquat. Not willing to take it any longer, Izuku squatted down and hefted her inside and shut the front door with a quick slam behind him as he grabbed her hips once he put her down. Their lips touched in a messy, unthinking way that lasted 3 seconds before Izuku embraced her so tightly it crushed her lungs like she knew he would. In a nice, hot whisper he spoke and brought them close as his fingers combed through her ratty hair. That doesn't even convey it enough. And quat. She rolled her eyes with a smirk as Izuku near effortlessly shuffled her to the couch. Geez, what's got into you, Mr. ? And quat. She swept her hand through his curls right as he rested his head in her chest and caressed her arms right as he stared up at her with those wonderful worshipping eyes that regarded her so grandly. Yet, they were dampened by a hair, and he cradled her head to his chest, running a palm down it as a sigh left him. An arm was wrapped around her, bringing her so close it was hard to move, and he stared off at nothing for a moment, only absent-mindedly petting her. I just really appreciate what you do for me. And quat. The smirk grew on her face, enjoying how much pull she had over him at the moment. Yet she also gave way to his affections and contented herself with being a very well-loved bump on a log while warmth gathered in her chest. Oh? And what exactly do I do that you appreciate so much? And quat. Izuku paused as heavy thought came over him. With it came a genuine smile as a light filled his emerald eyes. You let me be me. Any other place with everyone else on earth I need to act a certain way, I need to think before I speak, but here, with you, I can be free to act as I will. You don't push me away and let me smother you with my feelings. I hadn't had that in a long time. And quat. His smile shifted in tone, taking on a far more obsessive mood as he ran a hand down her back. That's why I want to give you everything I have inside me until I feel fine. I want you. And quat. He raised her chin up with the hand that was running over her back, letting the woman stare right into his eyes as a fire was burning inside him. I need you, so tell me what I can do to please you. And quat. A giggle escaped her lips as she lightly patted him on the cheek to partially kill the mood, as she had seen this same thing 1,000 times from him. You sure you aren't just saying this because you want to screw? And quat. He smirked, but with no less sincerity about him. Partially so, but I love you. I really, really do, and I hate showing that in simple words alone. And quat. Himiko laughed and leaned back in his arms as a warm blush came over her. Well, baby boy, the first thing you can do is go take a shower since you're all sweaty. Then afterwards I'll think of something more. And quat. A crinkle of discomfort came over him at being referred to like that. She hadn't used those terms in a while, or at least in a time where he was sober from lust enough to care, but he smiled all the same. Alright, I'll go wash. Do you feel like joining me by any chance? And quat. The blonde shook her head with a grin. If I do that, we both know you won't be getting clean. And quat. He shrugged nonchalantly, digging his fingers into her skin to annoy her if only a little. But is that a problem? And quat. She sighed and pushed him away with a grin. Yes, since I know you'll get ahead of yourself. Now get to it. And quat. Izuku frowned ever so slightly and planted a kiss to her forehead before he walked into her room, grabbed some of his extra clothes and shuffled into the bathroom. Moments later, water flowed through the pipes in the wall and Himiko found herself alone and feeling bubbly. Silently, she raised her legs up and kicked the air to try and burn off the energy in her core. It had been so boring without anyone around, and Chiki was still dealing with her bullshit and Zuzu was working up till now. She had binged some crappy Korean soap operas after her articles were done to numb herself, but she had just gotten so damn wired. Like some excessive energy just latched onto her and made her want to dance and move. A stupid part of her mind considered maybe it was her soul reacting to Izuku's. She had written a lot of blogs and articles online for over half a decade, so she'd read all the weird new age stuff that had only gotten worse since quirks were a thing. Some of it was utter bullshit, but others not so much. She actually fell down the rabbit hole plenty of lonely nights with nothing but a creative monster when she read articles on blood magic, ritual instructions and summonings arts and manifestation work, along with fortune telling and divination based on reading the way blood dropped from a cut index finger. It all fascinated her as a hobby, and to an extent she believed some of it. Perhaps the two of them had been drawn to each other because their vibrations were the same? The intervention of some deity? Izuku always offhandedly referenced some god of fate when he swore an oath, so maybe. She shook her head at the idea. It sounded too off focus. Yet that didn't lessen her giddiness. In fact, it made it worse to where she had to stand up and pace. Then, as she did so, the water cut off and Izuku's voice came from the bathroom. Hey Himiko? And quat. She stopped walking for a moment, slightly perplexed. Yeah? And quat. He spoke back casually, without a hint of hesitation in him. Should I just forget to put on clothes or not? And quat. The blonde pondered it for a moment and found her answer. Put your pants on at least. And quat. An alright came from the door, and a few minutes later it creaked open and he stepped out with a warm smell of ocean body wash masking the air, mixing with the copper and sweat. He stood tall with his belly flat, yet not overly muscled, and his chest toned ever so slightly. All throughout his torso were wide, charred black, rounded strips of scars that marked him. His face was clean and youthful, with a slight thinning around the cheeks from the drop of body fat, while the green of his eyes reflected the light calmly. He smiled, letting his teeth show in a dulled white that was ripe with sweetness. Looking at it all, Himiko found herself grateful for the sight and how heavily his eyes bore into her with that wonderful longing as she returned the smile. Are you feeling good? And quat. He walked over to her, proceeding to lift her up like she weighed nothing, and shrugged. I'm feeling better now. But that being said, is there anything I can do for you? ? Inquat. The girl hummed and put a finger to her chin, flicking through the mental catalog in her head. Then paused as an idea came to her, a dangerous one that caused her to cringe and one at the same time. They were alone and Cheeky was out of the picture for a while, so this might be the only chance she would have to try it. Yet she knew damn well it wasn't something you just casually spring on someone, especially when it needed so much prep work. But there were so many possibilities once they went through with it. She could show him all of her and she wanted that. He'd be the only one to survive seeing it, and that brought a strange, savage hope to her heart. Taking the plunge and deciding to push the letter ever so slightly, Himiko pursed her lips and squirmed out of his grasp as she weighed her words. 4 minutes passed with the blonde staring at him, and eventually she found something to say, though with each word she had to let them out in as easy and as gently as possible. Not adding too much force nor too much want. It had to sound casual, otherwise he'd flinch. Actually, I was wondering, since Cheeky is gone for a while and it's just us again, do you think we could try that one thing I talked about? The one with the knives ? Inquat. Izuku went wide-eyed at that, wincing at the suggestion but not moving from where he stood. His adoration-filled shine dulled to a cautious and apprehensive glance while discomfort ruled his body language. There was a worry to him as he stared at his lover, who looked begrudgingly hopeful with her beautiful golden eyes, and it was then he pursed his lips at the situation. I'm not saying no, but that concerns me. I understand we talked about this, but what exactly is going to happen? It's not that I don't trust you. I'm just new to this. Inquat. Himiko gave a small smile, one that didn't seem too upset, and took it in stride. It'll just be me nicking you for a while, and I'll throw in some more easy things, although, I know you said you wanted kisses, but can I do anything else for you? Inquat. The quirkless man kept his apprehension and reached out to grasp her shoulders as if to reassure himself. Can we just start off small with the cutting, please? Inquat. Sympathy glowed in her eyes as she caressed his cheek with her right hand, doing her best to ease the concern and worry in his heart. Sure Zuzu, we'll go slow. Now can you just wait on the couch while I get everything ready? It should take me a few minutes. Inquat. Izuku paused and looked at her with a heavy tenseness, partly out of guilt and partly out of his own desire to not be maimed instead of simply nicked. And I can tap out at any point? Inquat. The brows above her eyes furrowed a bit as Himiko glared at him indignantly, latching her left hand to his torso while her right one halted its petting. He was pulled forward and she answered with an almost insulted tone. Why wouldn't you be able to? This is all up for you to decide, and you're the one most at risk here, so of course you can. You always can. Inquat. Her eyes narrowed, striking him right down to the core. You weren't going to push yourself again, right? Inquat. He recoiled slowly, not in shame or in fear, instead to alleviate the growing discomfort building in his chest. I'm just nervous. I know you can take care of me, but I never saw myself getting into this situation for most of my life. Don't get me wrong, I'm more than willing to do it since you asked. It's, how long do you want to do this? And is there anything I need to be aware of? Inquat. Izuku inhaled deeply as some of his inner thoughts came out when he looked at his lover with a certain honesty. Do you want me to do anything? I mean, just laying there bleeding doesn't sound fair to you? If that's even the right way to put it. Like, do you want me to touch you? Finger you? Be loud? Be quiet? Inquat. Again he pursed his lips as a mix of shame, fear and concern showed in his eyes. He leaned in close to her ear and spoke in a whisper. Do you want me to scream? Inquat. Himiko continued to glare at him, softening her ire and soon finding even more sympathy in her heart. She considered it and cringed at the thought of hearing him scream in abject pain. A sigh left her lips and the villainess patted him softly on the cheek. I understand Zuzu, this is unique between the two of us, and frankly I think I did a shit job explaining things. I guess I'll start by saying what I have planned, but before that, would you mind if we forgot about the timer? I want this to be slow and organic between us where we can pace each other. Inquat. The man grimaced slightly, but didn't pull away from her. I guess that depends on how many times you plan to cut me. Inquat. The blonde shrugged and held up 2 fingers to his face, sounding oddly matter-of-factly. To start off I'll go 2 in a row so we can see how well you hold up. If it's too much, then we can do something else. If it isn't, then I'll give you a few minutes to relax. I'll excite you a bit and then move on to 4 and so on until we're both satisfied. Inquat. Izuku's rigid posture relaxed by a margin upon hearing that. A hint of embarrassment filled at having to ask this again, but he was her boyfriend, so it was only right that he do so for her sake. Okay, but what do you want me to do? I don't feel good about being a limp body for the whole thing. Inquat. She waved a dismissive hand at him, yet she halted halfway and paused. The golden hue of her eyes traveled to the bedroom doorway, and with it came an audible pop from her knuckles as she closed her fists with a heightened intensity. For a minute, all of her attention was solely on the doorway, and to Izuku's mild concern, Himiko's cheeks turned a flushed, rose pink. Only this was far more focused and lucid, for lack of a better word. Then in a slow turn, she stared at him with those hungry eyes. They weren't predatory like their rougher times, but there was certainly a weight in them that was honest and bare. She hesitated for a moment, darting her eyes to the nearest wall, only to bring it back to him. "Would you mind if I recorded us while we did it?" ? And quat. It was then Izuku balked at her words with disbelief ripe on his face. "Hell yes, I mind. Himiko, do you have any idea how easy it is for someone to hack into recording equipment? What would happen if someone quat?" She interrupted with a bit of steel in her voice while her cheeks remained flushed. "It would be with an old VHS recorder I bought. The thing's analog so nobody can see it unless they stick it in a tape player, and I can keep that hidden away. I just want to have something to use when you're away. So can I please set up the camera?" And quat. He stared at her with more than a little indignation, but crumbled at the almost pleading look in her eye. The sidekick shook his head at what he was about to say and answered, "Fine, but you show no one, not even Ochako, and you're taking it to the grave." And quat. Himiko perked up like a Christmas tree, and the pinkness of her naturally pale skin grew with an excited buzz that took over her being. Without another word she forced him to the sofa, and in the next second, her lips touched his in a deep, soul-stealing kiss that lasted a bit too long. Pushing herself off him, she smiled widely and a slight chatter came to her teeth. "Thank you, Zuzu, you won't regret this. Wait here while I get everything ready. When it's done I'll have you come in and we'll get started, alright?" And quat. She didn't wait for an answer before rushing back into her room with a skip and a speed that hadn't been seen since her league days. It might have been bad that she was this excited, this eager, but she just couldn't help it. The whole situation was perfect, and it was the one that had dogged her steps ever since they became more than acquaintances. Of course she'd be slow and gentle as a blade could be, but to actually live out one of her fantasies with someone who loved her for all of her, who wouldn't run away and she wanted, it was the happiest she'd been in a long time. Stepping inside the room and shutting the door behind her, Himiko surveyed the area and went to work by opening her closet. From there she pulled out a rubber bed cover that was haphazardly put away years ago and carried it to the mattress. Leaving it there, she began to pull off the sheets and the comforter, along with the pillows, so that only her king-sized bed remained. Spreading the cover out to both ends, the killer slotted it over the bed until the elastic wrapped around each corner so that it was flat and mostly free from wrinkles. Then she placed the pillows back on top so he'd have something to support his head and moved the rest of the bedding to the closet. That completed, she turned around to her dresser and opened the third drawer down to study the wealth of first aid kits, disinfectants, medical bandages, stitching line, medical staples, the staple gun, and a few tourniquets she bought just in case things went really bad. It was as overstocked as she remembered, and it had cost her quite a bit of money to amass so much, but any amount of cash was worth it for him. Taking out 2 first aid kits and double-checking to make sure they were stocked up properly, she placed them on the nightstand. Then she grabbed the staple gun, loaded it after inspecting that rust hadn't set in, and put it behind the kits on the nightstand. There was a severe lack of her former bubbly warmth as she did this, and now she felt, not detached, but far more calculating in making sure everything was in order. Running a hand over the items on the table, she went about it a methodical way, making sure to put the locations of them deep in her mind. Satisfied with that portion, she nodded at her work and squatted down to grab a metal footlocker about half a foot tall from under the bed. It was a black container sealed with a combination lock which she memorized perfectly. Taking a knee, Himiko fiddled with the lock and rolled the dial 3 times until it unlatched. Removing the lock, she opened the lid and was met by an array of books and notebooks filled with her writings, most of which she threw in here as a defeat. Feeling around between the contents, she eventually found a small indent on the bottom that her fingers slipped into seamlessly. Lifting with her legs from a squatting position, she brought the bottom up, along with all the books, and carefully put it down besides the footlocker. Taking another gaze inside, Himiko scanned the items hidden under the false bottom. 25 knives, each no longer than 10 inches from blade to handle, laid in an organized, carpet-like clump that supported the covering over them, and it was then the woman found herself enjoying a more platonic admiration for the tools. They were a diverse lot of blades. Most of them were the consumable spring-assisted folding knives that she used a lot in her early career for a quick slash and vanish job. She didn't really trust the folding type for any long-term use, but they were perfect as a cheap throwaway weapon. She always had a fondness for balisong knives over the traditional single-axle type blade, since those could last for years if they were made well and had the ruggedness of a fixed blade if she managed to lock the handle. A smile crossed her face when the memory of her first real balisong came back. She had been on the run for a year and a half and gotten some connections to the black market, namely Huron and his endless seas of wares. They had known each other on an associate level, and he gave her jobs from the union, which helped her hone her skills. Granted, she almost stabbed him when he offered to sign her up with a brothel that one time. She had gotten another job for him done, and the client paid in full when news spread about the mark, some pissy businessman who was buying too much stock in some company for her employer's comfort, being found dead in his car from a slit throat, and Huron gave her the 25% she was owed. But since it was her birthday, he took her to a warehouse somewhere in Tokyo afterwards and let her pick out any knife she wanted, free of charge. It was tucked away in a crate that she found after an hour of looking around. Encased in this nice wooden case within the guts of the crate was a steel-handled balisong that was so beautiful to stare at. It was only 4 inches long, which made it easy for everyday use, and the blade was this wonderful drop-point profile with an edge that always caught the light and had been perfectly angled that it sliced as cleanly as a razor. The handles had a nice heavy weight to them that made flicking them around between her fingers easy, and it had these dense rivets to them that clung to the neck of the blade without the need for cheap plastic washers that would only wear out over a few weeks. She remembered how she jumped up and down at having such a wonderful tool, and with it also came Huron giving her such a warm, almost fatherly smile at her reaction that she felt glad to know the guy. He was always like that distant uncle of the group when she joined the league, and she kept that knife for most of her time with them, almost as a reminder of him and the kindness he showed her. It was a shame that she lost it when that blue bitch Curious broke the blade, but at least Huron was still alive. He had survived like they all guessed he would, since he was just a broker and someone who knew how to play both sides like the weasel he is. She still had his number stored in the lockbox with the rest of her leftover info from her villain days, and he was still doing his trade of selling hard-to-get items without much issue. Though she only checked in with him once a year just to keep her connection to the underworld in case shit went south. Thinking about it, she had a spark of sympathy for the old guy, since he was bound to a cane since somebody shot one of his legs during the war to get his goods. Thankfully it was only a .22, but it destroyed a ligament and basically made him partially crippled. The thought continued to muse on her, and she had a question strike her. Would it be a good idea to introduce Zuzu to the guy in case he needed to flee with her? It wasn't like Izuku was a criminal or anything, and she'd seen enough of him to know he can keep a secret, but things can go wrong in a person's life in seconds. She knew that firsthand, and Huron could make people invisible if they paid enough. He even dabbled in the fake passport business so they could leave the country under new names if they absolutely had to. She blinked as she realized how off track she had gotten. That was a conversation and an idea for another time. Right now she had more important things to do. Refocusing on the collection before her, Himiko carefully drew a hand over each knife, their blades sheathed, and tested for what felt right at a touch. It couldn't be too long or she wouldn't have complete control over the pressure and movement. At the same time, she didn't want to use a folding knife, since those were always so uncomfortable to hold unless they had a thick handle, which none on hand did, and a fixed blade always looked so phallic to her that it had a certain flair. Soon she found one that just might be right. It was a hunting knife roughly 8 inches long overall, with 3 of them coming from the acute clip-pointed blade she met removing it from the cheap nylon sheath, and the rest going to the faux leather handle that felt good in the hand. The blade had a fairly thick spine that was smooth all the way to the tip, which would make using it far easier, along with a stub at the end of the handle that locked the hand into place to keep it from slipping. She examined the steel and found it free of rust, while the edge was sharp enough to dig a line into her thumbnail when she ran the blade over it. The villainess nodded in silent approval as she stood up with the knife in hand and set it flat on the nightstand before shutting the footlocker. It took her a moment to get to her feet, and with everything else done, now came the most important part. A bottle of hydrogen peroxide was grabbed from the still open third drawer, along with a sealed package of cleaning rags. Bringing them back to the nightstand, Himiko opened up a fresh rag and uncapped the peroxide. She soaked an area of the cloth in the disinfectant for a few seconds before putting the bottle down and handling the knife. It was a basic action she had done thousands of times in her life, where the blade was draped with the cloth and cleaned. As such, she found it rather cathartic. The prep work done, she laid the knife back down and went to her dresser, shutting the third drawer and opening the bottom one where her Super 8 resided. It took only a few moments to set up the tripod a few feet from the front of the bed, and the camera, as slim as it was, had no trouble balancing on the device. Again Himiko checked the knobs and the power, glad to see that everything was still in working order. The blonde peered through the lens until the focus was firmly on the entirety of the mattress, and once that was finished, she grabbed an empty tape and slotted it in, glad for the 3 hours it had to offer. Keeping that in mind, she thought about what else they could do. By and large it was everything she wanted, and if it got to perhaps 10 minutes, then she'd be happy. However, she had absolutely no idea what else she could do to make it just as special for him. Well, that and, he was a glass cannon. If she was using that Tomura-ism right, she could enjoy herself for all the time in the world with this, and Zuzu had a limit to the amount of pleasure she could stimulate before he popped off. That meant he would be far less eager to play along with her, yet she still wanted to make it last. It was going to be a tender, loving moment between the two of them, and not another person in the world would know about it, and she wanted to give him everything she was able. He had done the same for her, so why shouldn't she? The man had literally stayed, no more than that. He doubled down on his love for her when she spoke about her past, and nobody else worth her time would have stayed. He had been the one she confided in the most and exposed the largest bits of her past, and he never once flinched at it. She adored this man, and he was willing to gift her with his body, his very blood, so he deserved everything she was able to give. She wanted to erase all his troubles and have him bury his soul in their love. She wanted. Himiko paused as her heart rate started to pick up and sweat began to gather on her body. Suddenly she felt uncomfortable and yet not. like someone had hit her over the head with a live electrical cord or had slipped her 20 caffeine tablets. It was a rapid beat in her chest as blood rushed to her ears and rested in her cheeks, making her feel something close to drunk, but not exactly. She breathed deeply, trying to calm her body as it continued to ache in a delightful way. Again her mind buzzed and her heart eased to somewhere near controllable as she let a wide, fang-bearing smile out. It was heavenly, and by God did she enjoy it, enjoy what she saw in her head. So with that, Himiko studied the layout to make sure everything was right. When it was, she skipped to the door, eager to get this started. Izuku had never been so nervous in his life. There were countless times he envisioned something outrageous happening to him. Everything from beating Kachan into a pulp to smashing the skulls of those fuckers who made fun of him and Aki back in high school to how he would survive a villain attack. This was not one of them, and it brought a chill to his skin. He was willing to go through with this. It was the least he could do for her, and Himiko had been reliable in every single of these types of games. Yet there was still the base fear in him, even if a strange part of himself was, perhaps not looking forward to it in of itself, but more excited to what would come after. However, the fear and the nervousness was half of it. There was a wonder if what he was about to partake in was good for his health that bothered him, and to that was a curiosity of what the people around him would say if he explained it. Hell, would Ochako be okay with this? Or to that matter, would Himiko be okay afterwards when they finished? Was she having a relapse of some kind? She seemed completely lucid, and he'd seen her drink her daily blood before he left for work, so should he assume the best? Or should he say something in case this affected her? He sighed and frowned at how this situation was thrown on his lap. He knew he could say no, she made that clear, but at the same time she wanted it so badly. Thinking about it, he was prideful, in a really unhealthy way, that she wanted him, that she had been willing to even talk about that side of herself to him. Yet on the other hand was the potential for death, but he was a step away from ending his life when she first helped him, so maybe he shouldn't worry so much? It was just so damn strange that this was even a concept to him, much less one he willingly agrees to. Like, who the hell has an hour-long conversation with their girlfriend on the dynamics and wants of when they cut you for sexual gratification? Some people sure, but for most he assumed not so. He was certain nobody at his job or in Sato's friend group has these kinds of moments. Instantly his mind drifted to Mina. It had been a while since they last talked, and he wanted nothing more than to hear someone's opinion on what he was about to do. He loved Himiko dearly, but he worried if he was doing the right thing for her. Of course he wanted to gratify her every desire and tend to her needs and throw everything he was at her. But if she wasn't so unique sexually, then he wouldn't be having to consider these things. Yet at the same time, if she was different, then she wouldn't be her. She wouldn't have that amazing and delicious quirk, or those cute fangs, or that diet that made the whole house smell like copper, or live half of the things that made her so strong and steady. She wouldn't be Himiko, and he didn't like that idea, not one bit. Again he sighed and stole a glance at the closed bedroom door with a resigned grimace. She was taking quite a long time to make everything ready. Izuku continued to stare at the door, feeling like he was a boy again and set to be punished with how much worry was in him. Yet as he sat there in the empty living room, he also felt restless, like he needed to latch onto something. It was complicated in his head, where he had this desire to be around her, but also hesitated at what she was going to do to him. It had gotten to the point that he wished he was back in the office in front of his work computer so he could just shove the emotions aside and submerge himself in his job, or distract himself with making a new quirk notebook, but he couldn't in either case. So he just sat there with his thumbs twiddling as the clock ticked away. Then, like a slow, creaking herald of things to come, the door opened and Himiko stepped out with the most flustered face he had ever seen on the woman. It was so pronounced that her cheeks were pink enough to almost match Mina's in color, and she was smiling in an overexposed way that showed all of her teeth. The gold of her eyes honed in on him, sizing him up in a mix of what he assumed a predator and a mother hen would have. She continued to stare at him for a moment before she approached the sofa and wrapped her arms around him and kissed him deeply. Izuku didn't have time to put up a resistance, and he felt her tongue abuse his mouth for all of 5 seconds before she pulled away with a giggle. Himiko drew her knuckles over his cheek, staring right at him with a fervency he'd never seen, and broke the silence. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting, Zuzu. It took me a while to get everything ready. Anyway, let's get going." And quat. She then grabbed him by the hand and led him to the bedroom, where Izuku silently went along with her tugs as he tried to focus on what was in front of him. The interior was more or less as it was, except the sheets were pulled off and replaced with a rubber sleeve. There was a small hoard of medical supplies along with a short Bowie knife on the nightstand, and a small retro camera stared at it all a few feet away. Not one to stop for bullshit, he bit the bullet and let Himiko ease him down to the mattress, where he laid on his back while she looked down from the side. They made eye contact, and that flustered look was still there, only it softened somewhat as she brought a hand gently along his cheek. Her voice was a soft, quiet quiver of sincerity that eased him to the point his core muscles relaxed. "You're just a big goofy baby, aren't you, Zuzu?" and quat. He didn't get the chance to reply immediately, since she immediately walked over to the camera and turned on, which he could see from a small red light. This was a realm of strangeness he was unsure of, But again, it was for her, and as if to respond to his thoughts, Himiko undressed herself unceremoniously and crawled onto the bed. It was then he felt his body tense and his breathing pick up as she approached him. He could see everything, and instantly Izuku began to slip his pants off, only for Himiko to grab them at the hem and slowly pull them off and throw them to the floor. His boxers went next as he couldn't get them off fast enough with how badly he wanted her. Seconds later she was on top of him, her arms supporting her body while she stared down with those same softer eyes. Carefully she lowered herself to him and Izuku took her in his arms, adoring how wonderful and alive embracing her made him feel. Yet she shifted to the left and landed next to him, where she embraced him in turn. His eyes followed a movement below as she was gripping one of her breasts and spoke in an almost meek tone. "Can you suck on them, Zuzu?" ? And quat. The quirkless man looked at his lover and smiled as he ran his fingers through her hair. "Always." And quat. Squirming down by a small measurement, Izuku kissed the area around her breasts. He stole a kiss to her neck, the bottom of her earlobe, and so on until he reached the nipple and clamped his lips down. Himiko moved her arms and cradled his head, petting it as her voice had a demanding, yet gentle tint to it that took him slightly off guard. "Go slow, I want to have this be a while." And quat. Taking the message, he eased up on the urgency he was working with and merely suckled, which was then she continued to speak. "Good boy Zuzu, good boy, just lay back and let mommy take care of you." And quat. Normally he would have cringed slightly on the inside at that, but right now he only wanted to listen as he locked an arm around her torso to keep her close. Himiko kept caressing his hair and went on. "You poor little thing, everybody's hurt you, haven't they? They kicked you and pushed you away until you were so lonely that you wanted it all to end. Those awful people hurt someone as precious as you, it's not right. But don't worry, I'm here now and I won't let anyone touch you again." And quat. She brought a hand over his torso, caressing the charred scarring of his skin which caused him to wince on reflex. Again her voice came out softly and sounded angelic to him as she kept touching his scars. "Bakugo did this, he made your body all crispy. I know it hurts, even now I've seen you curse when the skin moves too much, but you just look so pretty to me this way. Your body is so special that nobody else has one like it, and I like the way you look. Your face is so cute and you have all these nice scars, and the way you look at me, I love it all so much. But that's why I'm gonna mess you up and see all that lovely red, so you can forget about him." And quat. Izuku raised a metaphorical eyebrow at her words, but went along without addressing the veins of embarrassment flowing to his mind while she pushed him down. He was on his back, looking up at the woman as she reached over to the nightstand and picked up the knife before meeting his eyes once more. There was hesitation in her glance, but it was coupled with an obvious want. She gazed at him, then his torso, then the knife and back to him for a few seconds as her fingers tightened around the handle. "Alright, before this goes any further, let's just recap. If you want to tap out then say the word pineapple, okay?" And quat. Izuku nodded as his muscles tensed at the sight of the knife. "Pineapple, got it." And quat. Himiko returned his action and answered. "Right, now repeat it with me like last time, pineapple." And quat. He did as asked and spoke. "Pineapple." And quat. She followed suit. "Pineapple." And quat. He said it a third time like she taught him to. "Pineapple." And quat. Even more hesitation lingering in her eyes as the ritual completed, but with it came a sharp inhale that sounded hot and aroused while she held the knife. Her cheeks pinkened again, becoming fresh when she tried to suppress the smile on her face and failed. The curving fangs of her maw were seen, and there was a quality to her expression that reminded Izuku of a slightly intoxicated person. Her breathing was a slow, deep pattern as she looked over him, only to then plant herself just above where his cock was, which had it tucked between her ass while she shifted some of her weight to his belly. Again Himiko had that drunken blush which covered most of her face as she ran her free hand over his torso and dragged her nails lightly over the skin. "I'm going to cut you now, Zuzu. Is that okay with you?" And quat. It was a question, but the way she said it and how excited she sounded suggested otherwise. Izuku pushed the awkward, slightly scared feelings down and inhaled to prepare himself. He looked at Himiko and remained resolute in spite of how off-putting her expression was. "Go ahead." And quat. The villainess smiled wickedly at his answer and wagged a teasing finger as she came a little closer to his face. You tell mommy what you want and do it nicely, Mr. And quat. Izuku pursed his lips for a moment as his pride sparked slightly at the request, but he cast it aside for her sake. "I want you to cut me." And quat. Himiko had such glee in her eyes upon hearing him that it was honestly startling, and the next thing he knew she placed her empty hand on a spot on his side. Then she sat up and removed it as she brought the blade right above his skin. "That's my Zuzu." And quat. The edge came down, placing a thin pressure where her hand once was as it was dragged upward with a quick dash of her wrist. A hot, burning sensation came from his side as pain rocked all the way up to his brain from his skin splitting open, which caused him to quietly curse in response. Then came a constant low stinging that hurt in that low, annoying way that was comparable to what his scars gave at times. A giggle came from Himiko when she lifted the knife, which was now slightly stained red along the cutting side, and licked it clean. She stared at him, watching his expression, and grinned as she pulled the knife back and leaned down close enough that he could smell her breath. "So how was it? You like it?" Quad. Izuku paused as he saw her, trying not to destroy the mood she was setting up. It was hard, but she wanted to do this with him, so may as well put up with it. Besides, it didn't hurt any more than the biting. Yet he felt himself going slightly soft, and he guessed it was due to fear and the unfamiliarity of the situation. He also knew he didn't look enthusiastic, but he was unsure if he should or not. Like, did she want him to resist more? Beg for more? Should he ask? How could he ask? Blinking at his lover while pain annoyed him from the side, the quirkless man gave a shrug, unsure if he should grab her or not. "Like I said, I'm not against it, but it's fine. So keep going if you want." Quad. The girl giggled and kissed him with a strange passion that felt unusual to be subject to as she sat back up and took in the view of his body. "Aren't you just the sweetest thing? You look so wonderful and handsome, but you're my little baby, so of course you are. You just have the cutest freckles on your face, and the way your chest is so firm is to die for, and you're just a stupid little thing. You're my little thing that needs me, and I need you, and Quad." She halted mid-sentence and quickly brought her lips to the cut she made. They were rough and nice. Then a sucking sound came from that spot, and Izuku could literally feel the blood leave his body and enter her mouth while her tongue agitated the wound to make it weep. A few seconds later, Himiko came back up for air with his blood staining her lips, and the blonde continued to stare at him with depraved eyes as she focused on his torso. Her voice was harsher, louder and more forceful as she spoke in a tone soaked in lust, and as she did so he saw her fists clenched over and over like she was trying to keep herself together. "Fuck, look at what that bastard did to you. Look at these nasty, filthy fucking scars. It's a fucking miracle you're alive at all. It's so goddamn amazing. You just look so scruffy and you smell like blood. God fucking damn it, you're such a put-upon thing, aren't you, Zuzu? Where'd you be without me? You'd be dead with your neck broken on the water, and I'd be all alone." And Quad. She went on as her nails raked across his chest. "You're just a stupid, unlucky man baby who wouldn't have shit without me. I need you. I want you, and I'd take better care of you than that bitch of a mother you have. You're my baby, just mine, and if Cheeky wants to take you away, then I'll break her." And Quad. Himiko raised the knife up again, which was doubled by her slapping the brunt of his chest as hard as she could. Then, before the pain could fade, she grabbed a section of his torso on the left side and spoke in that overly excited voice with what sounded close to mania to him. "Here comes the second one." And Quad. Pain fired through him again as that thin, unilateral pressure of the edge split his skin open with a downward slice. He gritted his teeth and let out another quiet curse as air immediately touched the wound. Himiko brought the knife up to her tongue once more and licked it clean, looking positively drunk off the whole thing. Again she leaned down, running her hand through his curls with an adoring face that made it seem like she either wanted to embrace him or bite him. All the while her voice came out in a high-pitched squeak that sounded demeaning and ridiculous. "That's a good boy, Zuzu. That's my baby. Let me see all that pretty red." And Quad. She grabbed one of her breasts and scooted forward on his belly to where her chest was now at his mouth. She shook it and spoke in that squeaky voice again that was grating on his pride, whatever was left of it. "You wanna suck on my tits again? Come on. I know you want to." And Quad. Izuku stared up at the girl who meant the world to him and grimaced. None of this had been a deal breaker or enough to make him stop, but the way she talked, it annoyed him and also endeared her to him. He supposed that if it wasn't for the strange combination of how cute she was trying to sound, how much she insulted him and praised him in the same breath while holding a knife to his skin, then he'd be fine. Really, he was fine now, and he knew what he was getting involved in while being with her. Himiko was simply like this, and he understood it, he hoped. After all, he stuck by her through learning all her horrible past, and he had no intentions of ever leaving, but it was something else to be subject to her in such a way. He knew and even experienced what she liked almost from day one, but it was just the way she was saying the words and how out of it she looked. Sure, she'd gotten flustered when they did this before, and he was accepting and even prideful that she came to him for her needs and saw how her eyes tended to drift in the heat of the moment. However, he noticed a slight shake to her body, and her breathing was getting far more rapid, not to the point where she couldn't control herself physically, but something was going on. Of course, he'd been that way himself when he'd first seen her in lingerie, and he remembered how ungodly good it felt, so she had to be feeling that now. She was happy and enjoying what he was doing for her, so why should he ruin that? But on the other hand, she was literally opening small parts of his body and drinking the blood. If he wasn't under her complete attention, Izuku would have shaken his head. He didn't feel like he needed to quit, although he still had this tingle of fear in the back of his skull, and she seemed to be really enjoying herself, so may as well keep it going. Slowly he nuzzled against her chest and brought his mouth over her nipple and suckled like he was asked, which resulted in Himiko cradling his head once more. Yet the nurturing tone of voice from before was hampered and was instead far more brash as her excitement grew. "You do that, you nasty fucker. You're just helpless without me, aren't you?" And Quad. Suddenly she wrapped both arms around his head and brought him closer, shocking him as she went on talking. "Go on, take as much as you want." And Quad. It was embarrassing to be coddled like this, but he had gotten used to her outlandish shows of affection and kept going, all the while his mind continued to crank in the reprieve. He hated waiting and more so he loathed her taking it slow, as immature as it was for him to admit he was used to rather quick sessions where she inflicted the pain and pleasured him while he did the same for her. It was nice, fast and something he didn't have to focus on for too long. She got to play her games and he got to explode. Now it was drawn out and he hadn't even gotten to return the favor. At least she was considerate enough to give him a break, but he wanted to be more involved instead of just acting like a mat for her to carve up. It was weird to put it to his forefront, but he wanted to hear her moan like when he eats her and maybe get a few more kisses. But how long had this really been going on? It felt like an hour had passed, but that couldn't have been the case since they only started a little bit ago. Did it just feel like that because he was in a situation he didn't exactly like, or was he so focused on the now and what was happening to him that time seemed to fly by? The pain oddly kept him anchored, but it just didn't stick as much aside from a light, burning annoyance. After what could have been 2 minutes, 10 minutes or 30, Himiko gently pushed him away and she studied his face, drawing a finger along the rim of his cheek. Okay Zuzu, I'm gonna start slicing you up for real now. So lay back and relax. If it gets too much, what do you say ? Inquat. The condescension irked him, but Izuku brought out a weak smile to ease his mind. Pineapple. Inquat. She grinned in an almost smug satisfaction as her fingers tapped his side. That's right honey, now here we go. Are you ready ? Inquat. Izuku inhaled and prepared for whatever she had in store for him, hoping he kept those lessons about ignoring pain he learned from school so long ago. Then he paused and sat up. Can I kiss you ? Inquat. Himiko continued to grin, but obliged when Izuku reached out and embraced her. Their lips touched and it was so energizing that he started to shift his hands around her back, glad to finally get to be the one holding. Yet he stopped dead in his tracks when he felt something sharp barely poke at his side. Nope Zuzu, this is gonna be slow, so no handsy stuff just yet. Inquat. He paused like someone had smacked him across the face with a tire iron. She hadn't been this aggressive since the first couple of months they met and it shocked him to see it again. Yet to her credit, he wasn't cut despite the obvious excuse she could use. So showing only some of his disappointment, Izuku looked her in the eye and stole one more kiss. I love you. Inquat. The former criminal tilted her head to the side and pushed him down as her debased smile remained. I know, and that's what makes you perfect. But let's stop the waiting. Inquat. The gold of her eyes moved to one spot on his body and soon came the slicing pain. He grimaced and cursed, but had barely any time to catch his breath as it came again seconds later and then again and again. All tiny, barely an inch cuts that felt like tiny bits of fire one after the other came in rapid succession while he tried to not shout in agony. Himiko's voice came through the sensations of pain, sounding far more omniscient as he laid there. You're so wonderful Zuzu, you're perfect. You apostrophe re. Inquat. She ceased her praises as the cutting continued. Soon all that was heard was her hot, bated breath that came out in tight huffs as she continued to shake as more and more of him was turned to sanguine. Yet after what felt like hours to him, the slicing stopped and Himiko stared down at him with a blank, expressionless face as her smile vanished, leaving only a still, mannequin-like mask. Her eyes were hazy as she gazed at him with a bloody knife in hand, and moments later she spoke. You know, you're the only family I have left. Out of everyone on this earth, the billions of worthless fucking people and the few folks worth a damn, we managed to meet when I was at my loneliest. I hadn't held someone in 3 years and I had to hide and be so quiet that it hurt. All I did was stay in this fucking apartment and watch as the world went by as I got older and weaker. Inquat. She went on as her voice was distant and quiet. I had given up on it all. Love, ambition, everything aside from the cheap kicks I got from movies. I really wasn't that far from where you were. The only difference is that I refused to die when so many people wanted me gone. I was a ghost living a shallow existence with only Ochako checking in on me, but even then it felt so horrible because I was a hindrance. All the future held was the whispers of the dead. Inquat. A hand touched his face as she continued. Then right as I was at my lowest, when I felt the most horrible because I remembered how my best friend died in my arms on that same day, you showed up. All drunk, smelly and greasy with the dumbest excuses looking to end your pain. Inquat. A smile crawled over her face, a demented yet sweet one that funneled all her energy as she obsessively caressed the side of his cheek. I was pissed and lonely so I went along because nobody else worth my time would accept me, but then, I just couldn't help myself. The more you came over and the more you held me, I just wanted you more and more. But you were more to me than a friend or a mark, you were my baby. You were so needy and whiny and you just ate up my attention. Even when I attacked you, even when I had blood on my teeth and spoke about my past, you never let go because you needed me just like I needed you. Like I need you now and forever. Inquat. From the corner of his eye Izuku saw the knife move and slowly land at the edge of his chest, and in an instant the tip grazed across from the left to the right, opening a shallow cut that rested below his left nipple and ended at his right. He cursed at this and Himiko lowered her head, bringing her tongue along the length of the wound, before sitting upright and kept talking through a crimson smile. I love you, Izuku. I love you more than anything. Than anyone, and when I'm with you I never want it to end. Izuku felt something warm touch the rim of his belly, something wet and slimy that soon began to crawl up his torso, and as he looked at the woman on top of him, he saw why. As she smiled, a gray goo came from her skin and began to emerge throughout her body. In less than a second it covered her. The woman he loved was nothing more than a twisting ball of slime that squirmed and quaked like a living thing, and as it did, a voice came out, one that sounded wrong. I'd do anything for you. Masculine and feminine tones, those that sounded like himself and her, mingled in an off-key tune as if his voice had been smashed through a corrupted recording and replayed in high definition. The matter swarmed around what was once Himiko, mixing with the stink of iron and sweat as its own unique smell, something that reminded him of raw meat, combined to assault his nose. An arm reached out to touch him, a swirling, liquid limb that held his face as whatever solidity it had was weakened. It was like millions of worms were crawling along his cheek until at last, the mass shrank and reformed, which in its place wasn't Himiko, but himself, staring down at him with depraved, adoring green eyes while it gave a smile almost too wide for his face. He saw blood stain his teeth and the knife which had cut him so many times in his right hand as this clone ran its free hand through his curls and spoke. You mean the world to me, Zuzu, and I'd help you with whatever you needed. I'll shelter you, I'll feed you, I'll do everything in my power to protect you. The doppelganger had his voice, used his words, and still the blood dripped down from his lips like some beast from hell. It raised up the knife and twirled it between its fingers with a mastery Izuku lacked, like it was second nature to it as it lowered the weapon to expose it to him. A venom entered the clone's voice, one filled with the deepest of hates and an adoration that unnerved him as it leaned so close to his ear that he felt the vibrations in his soul. I'll always be by your side no matter what tries to tear us apart, and I'll fight tooth and nail for you, because I love you more than anything else. Do you understand me? There were no words to describe how much confusion, fear and pain flowed through his body as he laid with all this going on top of him. Logically he knew it was still Himiko under all that, but his mind wasn't in the best of places, much less when the person who was an exact copy of him dragged their tongue along his earlobe. He knew the words were sweet and her powers were amazing, but in that moment he felt trapped as he saw his own face drenched in blood and having her smile. Then the knife came to view and made it worse as all his own animalistic fear capitalized on the association with pain that had. Then came sudden thoughts and ideas, ones that began to scream at him. She had killed people before, the woman admitted to it countless times and said she used to kill for a victim's blood. She was dangerous and unpredictable, so could end him at her leisure. All it would take was a deeper slash with that blade and he'd bleed out. She wanted him to bleed, and his life was literally in her hands, and at the moment he was so disturbed by what was in front of him that nothing made sense. He loved this woman like nothing else, but she wasn't her anymore. She was a distorted mirror of himself, and even if he knew that he'd gush endlessly and ask questions on how it worked if the situation was less intimate, Izuku wanted to just scream. He was scared, and that froze him as he saw those green eyes stare back at him. He felt his cock finally give up and go soft as the fear consumed him, and he remained stuck in that hellish limbo. For a few heart-chilling moments all he did was gaze back at the girl who wore his face and found her gazing right back into the depths of his soul. Then a softer tone came out in his voice, one that sounded alien yet familiar as those judging eyes filled with sympathy. You okay, Zuzu? And Izuku blinked at the question, suddenly finding that he could breathe and that some of his fear vanished. He said nothing for a time as an apologetic guilt swarmed him that battled with the other emotions. Soon he tried to rein in his more blunt inclinations to simply ask that she stop and gave a weak smile to erase her worry. Yet he had gotten more than his fill of this and wanted it to end, or at least not have to see something out of a nightmare. So he thought more about it and hoped to the god of luck that this didn't upset her as he tried to speak in his kindest voice. Himiko, would you mind if you turned your quirk off? It's amazing of course, but I'd prefer it if I saw you rather than me. The woman who looked exactly like him paused as she developed a rather self-conscious shame about her and lessened her smile. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just in the swing of things and ... Izuku raised his hand in surrender. Hey, it's fine. Your power is great. I just wish you gave me a heads up beforehand. A laugh that sounded like the one he would use and not came from her throat as she doubtlessly sought to ease the tension in the room. Yeah, I guess I probably should have. How about we call it for tonight and we try again tomorrow after you get off work? Izuku hoped his relief wasn't as plain on his face as it felt on the inside. Yet with it came a guilt for what happened. Maybe if you want to call it in. That being said, and I feel manageable at least, would you mind if I head to a clinic after a while? I figure those rewind shots should fix me up without leaving scars. Himiko's eyes popped open at his words, and with them returned that debased, wide blushing smile that transferred to the fake skin. She turned her head to the camera and then back to him as heat returned to her breath. That's not a bad idea, and since your fresh scars can be healed up, do you mind if I do one more thing? Izuku hesitated and sighed, deciding to do his duty to her. Fine. And quat. The woman squealed in joy, which sounded perverse and wrong coming from his throat. Alright Zuzu, now can you go to the living room and wait while I take care of my makeup ? And quat. He raised an eyebrow at her before realizing she was referring to her quirk's byproduct. But what if I get blood all over the carpet ? And quat. Himiko waved a dismissive hand. I didn't cut you deep enough for any of them to be actively bleeding, so it's all clotted by now. Besides, you stained the floor with every other type of bodily liquid. What's one more ? And quat. He lowered his head at that, but met her eyes again with a curious glint as he reached a hand to grasp her wrist. For a second he drew a thumb over the skin and found it felt just like the real thing, and suddenly remembered what he usually did with her goop. Keeping his eyes on hers, he spoke up and decided to go for it, if only because his curiosity was killing him. Hey Himiko, about that other thing I wanted. Would you mind if I bit off some of your quirk from you ? And quat. The woman stared at him in bafflement and then disgust, yet she didn't pull away from his touch. Fine, just be quick about it. And quat. Without pause she laid down and presented his body to him while having a slightly disgruntled annoyance about her face that was muddled by excitement which didn't translate to the faux genitals to Izuku's slight scientific interest. Seeing the chance, Izuku sat up from his prone position and cursed as his sore muscles and legion of wounds attacked him. Then he placed both hands on her torso. He paused as legitimate fear of harming her came to him, and he looked to his lover as he hovered his head above her midriff. You sure I'm okay to do this? You won't be hurt or anything ? And quat. Himiko rolled her gifted green eyes and answered. This stuff acts like body armor for me. I've literally been stabbed while I was in disguise and my quirk stopped it by producing more of it around where the knife went in. So long as I have enough blood from someone, then I'm fairly certain I could survive a bullet to the head, and you gave me plenty, so get it out of the way. And quat. Thousands of questions bounced around in his mind as he wanted to know more, but he forced them aside as his main curiosity took hold. Easing himself down, he paused once more and looked at her. I'm gonna bite now. And quat. She waved a dismissive hand like this was a mere inconvenience for her. Go ahead. And quat. Taking a breath, Izuku opened his mouth and sunk his teeth into the area around the rim of her belly and instantly met resistance as his teeth touched the skin. The best way he could describe it was like biting into a chocolate pie where there was a stiff outer layer that had the toughness of actual skin, and under that was a warm, gooey mush that clung to his teeth and moved as if alive. Slowly he closed his jaws as he pulled away a mouthful of whatever came out of her pores and swallowed as he saw a shifting patch of gray goo move and almost instantly replace the bit that went down his stomach by growing like a rapid spreading moss or bread yeast as it rose up from below and the sides of the imprint made by his mouth until it appeared nothing happened. Izuku watched this happen and somehow became even more enthralled by the woman as she raised her head with her eyes still there. Are you happy now ? And quat. He eyed her and answered with such genuineness that it sounded disportional. You're fucking amazing and I'm so unspeakably grateful I met you. And quat. The woman appraised his expression before sitting up with a reluctant smile. That's enough of that, go on and wait. I'll be out in a minute. Izuku returned the smile and got himself off the bed with a loud creak when the part of the mattress cover stuck to his ass from all the sweat came loose. He stood for a few seconds as blood flowed back into his limbs properly, causing him to swear as he made his way to the door. Pain battered him in countless tiny pinpricks as his wounds became agitated to the air, but none of them were bleeding, thankfully. It took him all of 3 seconds to reach the sofa when he entered the living room, and by the god of luck did it feel good to not have all that weight on him. Still, the nick stung and made him generally feel unpleasant, so Izuku merely leaned back on the couch and began to think. He certainly did not enjoy what happened, but what could he do? Himiko was simply as she is, so it was best if he got used to this kind of rough play. Although, it didn't matter, there was enough to worry about. He was just glad he got to spend time with her. And as if to show the point, the bedroom door swung open and his clone stepped out with the camera stand. It was placed in the middle of the room, and then his lover proceeded to walk into the bathroom. I'll only be a minute. And quat. It was still so strange to hear his own voice come from someone else, but he didn't have much time to contemplate that, since a few seconds later Himiko stepped out in all her naked glory, finally looking like her original self. However, that was slightly dampened by the bloody knife in her right hand. She approached the couch and grinned with a blushing, excited wickedness about her as she stood with tool in hand while Izuku calmed himself down as that familiar tingle of fear crept up his neck. Her arm extended to him and offered it to him with that desire-filled voice. Stand up for me, Zuzu. And quat. He did what she asked and found himself facing the camera with his tattered, cut-ridden body exposed to the camera. Himiko continued to grin and suddenly grabbed his flaccid cock with her free hand right as she put the tip of the knife to his chest. That's a good boy, Izuku. Now I'm gonna write a few things down, and if you wait till the end then I'll make you feel really good. And quat. Izuku winced at the statement as he saw the knife held at his chest and eyed his lover cautiously. Yet he had come this far, so he inhaled and tried to focus on the touch below his belt line. Go ahead then. And quat. he said with an oncoming sense of dread as he felt the skin of his chest start to get sliced with such a low pressure that he knew it was shallower than some of the cuts made to his torso. All the while there was the feeling of Himiko jerking him with her offhand that barely made up for the pain. Again and again she brought the knife in strange patterns that were lightening fast as he continually heard his body scream while still being in this coupling of pain and pleasure. Blood dripped down his chest and with it came slicing that seemed random until at last, Himiko threw the knife on the sofa and spoke up. All done. The reprieve from the shock only lasted a single heartbeat since Himiko dropped to her knees and grabbed him by the hips. His eyes tracked to where her head was and found his dick firmly inside her mouth. The whole of his body clenched at the warm, slimy sensation around most of his shaft and how her tongue teased along its sides while her fangs barely touched it. For a time he couldn't guess. He had none of the usual releases that went with their games and now, with such a foreign gift that was instantly better than her hands, Izuku couldn't control himself. In an instant he was done and feeling more weak in the knees than ever, so much so that he had to reach out to Himiko for support as the whole world went white for a few seconds. The slasher on the other hand was coughing and spitting out his seed after it shot down her throat. Izuku recovered minutes later, suddenly acknowledging that it was all worth it for that while Himiko got over her gagging and fixed him with a mischievous eye. You really liked that, didn't you Zuzu? He nodded, completely spent as he tried to stay upright. Clearly, now can I return the favor? She smirked with an impish light to her. How about we make out for a bit? The quirkless man stared at his beloved, knowing by her expression that she was being honest and spoke with a firmness that held no debate. Absolutely not. I'm drawing the line at kissing you with my, just go wash your mouth out, please. I'm done for tonight. Himiko laughed as she spat out the last bit of it onto the carpet. I'll say, if you had put that much inside my snatch, I'd probably be pregnant 2 times over. He shook his head as his patience finally wore thin. You are a nasty, kinky bitch of a woman and you worry me to death, but I love you anyway. She gave another smirk as she walked over towards the bathroom. And yet you're the motherfucker who keeps begging to pop my cherry. Izuku smiled as the door shut. Because you're well damn worth it. Later on after Himiko freshened up, turned the camera off and grabbed a medkit, the two of them sat on the sofa as she began to clean and manage his injuries. Swabs soaked in disinfectant worked along the sea of cuts on his body as the blonde talked. Thanks for making tonight so special for me. I really can't explain well enough how good you made me feel, Izuku. Another bandage was set and she went on with talking, not giving him a chance to speak as more plaudits burst forth. I mean everything I said back there, you really do mean the world to me. If you ever need anything you can ask me, no matter what. Izuku cringed as bacteria was cleansed from his body, but somehow found the will to respond. I know that, I just think things could have been handled better tonight. She paused as an eyebrow was raised. How so? The man pursed his lips and spoke as she continued to care for him. I didn't like just laying there. I understand that you need me to be still so you don't make a mistake, but it was uneven if that makes sense. I wanted to touch you more and instead you went on cutting. She narrowed her eyes ever so slightly at him. You never asked for that. He returned her ire, finding the withheld grievance coming out. Because I was worried about ruining the mood for you. I didn't feel like I needed to stop, but to bring you out of that joy over some petty stuff like that seems selfish. And another thing, did it have to be so long? I don't mind if you want to bring blood into this. You've been transparent about that since day one, but I'm used to these things lasting a few minutes. Himiko glared at him as she moved on to cleaning his lower wounds. Maybe if you could last longer than a few minutes then we wouldn't have this problem, and I get that you were trying to think about me, but just ask when you want me to touch you. I mean, didn't you like suckling off me? Izuku shrank back a bit in shame at what she said and answered. Well, maybe you can help me learn how to last longer. As for the other things, Himiko, you were really out of it. Like you were shaking and I was worried about ruining it for you. The tit thing, honestly it was a bit much. She raised an eyebrow again. What do you mean? I always talk to you like that. He shook his head. Yeah, but barely. You kept insulting me throughout it while I was just going along. It's just not a thing I like, and the other stuff you said, please don't take this the wrong way, but it creeped me out. Her expression went wide and more than a little indignant at his words. Creepy? What's creepy about what I did? Izuku gave her a frank face and answered. The part before or after you transformed into me without a hint of a heads up? This time she recoiled from the iron in his voice, looking genuinely upset. It wasn't that bad, was it? I just like using my quirk when I can. He sighed as his final cut was cleaned. It isn't that your quirk is bad, it was that I had to sit there being cut up for who knows how long. Then you stop out of the blue, slice a line in my chest and suddenly transform into me without a word of warning while I'm still processing what was going on. Izuku put his hands to his chin and continued before she started to withdraw internally. Don't get me wrong, I love your quirk and it's a goddamn miracle, but imagine how freaked out you'd be if I suddenly turned into you after eating your goop and had a bloody knife in my hand. And quad. She glared at him once more as she placed an arm around him. I'd be freaked out, sure, but I'd let you know as soon as it happened. And quad. Izuku mimicked her action and brought her close. That aside, I know you won't like this all that much, but could we take a step back from using knives? I'm fine with biting or hitting, but I don't want to have to go to the doctor after every time we get busy. And quad. Himiko blushed at his question, seeming genuinely embarrassed by it. Right, that's completely fine, Zuzu. I'm just glad you were willing to let me use them at all. And quad. He smiled as he planted a kiss on her forehead. Good, now do you mind cleaning up while I head to the clinic? And quad. The woman frowned at that and clung yet tighter to him. You don't want me to go with you? And quad. Izuku shrugged as he tried to get off the sofa with her hanging onto him. I think people will ask less questions that way. Besides that, could you also reach out to Ochako while I'm away? We haven't heard a word from her. And quad. Reluctantly Himiko released him and moved towards the bathroom with a pout. Alright, I can do that. And quad. He grinned in approval, only to pause as his eyes drifted down and saw what was written on his chest. This woman had actually carved the words Himiko's baby into his skin. That was crazy, but he agreed to it and it would be healed up before the day, so it wasn't that big a deal. Grabbing his clothes from across the apartment, Izuku dressed himself and soon made his way to the front door. I'll be back in a while. And quad. The villainess answered from the kitchen as she readied her cleaning supplies. I'll be waiting for you. And quad. With that, Izuku left to go to mend his body and hope that the rest of his weekend would be better without any more crazy issues cropping up out of nowhere. Yet somehow he doubted it. A punch was thrown at Izuku's head by a fist the size of his face, and somehow he managed to dodge, only to be served a hard kick to the shin, which was followed up by another blow that caught him by the chin. He fell hard to the ground, but got back up in a heartbeat despite the buzzing in ears. A smile creeped around his face right as his foe threw a strike aimed at his gut, and he responded by stepping out of range and slamming his fist into their belly. That earned him a grunt of pain from his foe as their muscled stomach handled the attack. Then he followed it up with a blow to the side. Evidently that was not a good idea, since his opponent recovered at the right time and kicked him in the thigh and sent him to the floor again. Sweat blisters on Izuku's forehead and everything hurt, but he was enjoying himself and hoping the fight could go on, only to be met with a loud ding from the bell. Scowling at the match being over, he got to his feet as his foe threw off his gloves with a huff before looking back at the quirkless man. Not bad, Mophead, you're getting better. Still got a long way to go, but all in all you did good today. And quad. Izuku eked out a smile at his employer and undid his own gloves, making sure to take his time and rest instead of pushing through and hurting himself. Thanks, boss. I tried to make it a pain in the ass. And quad. The sugar hero smirked and took a seat at the corner stool on his side of the ring. Well, you succeed in that since you just wouldn't stay down. Anyway, man, I've been wondering about how you've been ever since Bakugo crashed back into your life. I mean, everybody's heard of you all the time when we were teens, but dealing with somebody like him can't be pleasant. And quad. Izuku shrugged and stretched as sweat gathered under his shirt. Honestly, after the initial shock wore off, I've kind of accepted it. Don't like the guy. Hell, I used to really fucking hate him since I always thought he lived the high life, and now ... And quad. He paused to breathe and shook his head in confusion at his emotions. He's still not my favorite person, but the guy has his own problems. I mean, I still want to break his nose every so often when he starts mouthing off, but I don't want to stab him anymore, so that's good, I guess. And quad. Sato listened and shrugged in turn, having gotten the bad habit from his sidekick. Hey, I hear you. He's never the best person to hang with, but he does try at times to be better. Though if I can ask, what exactly made you want to shank him? And quad. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the man like something was wrong. You're taking a near admittance of contemplate murder really well for a guy in your position? Shouldn't you be taken aback or shocked or horrified? And quad. A scoff came from the muscular crime fighter that sounded cynical and more than a little resentful. For Katsuki Bakugo? Hell no. We've all wanted to whip his ass, even if he has some good qualities sometimes, and I can only imagine how bad he was as a kid with bombs for hands. Fuck. Most of us have fought with him before since he was such a dick. I remember one time during our third month at UA he started getting pissy and using his quirk to intimidate a guy in our class by the name of Kaminari and ended up getting electrocuted into passing out. And quad. The name sounded vaguely familiar to Izuku and he suddenly found himself working through his mental catalog of heroes. That guy, he goes by Charge Bolt, right? The same guy who runs that record label with his wife, Earphone Jack? And quad. Sato nodded. Yeah, they've been together since before the war and they do okay. Anyway, I gotta ask, dude, why exactly was Bakugo so obsessed with you? Because given how much of an asshole he was to the people who were the cream of the crop, I suspect he was horrible to someone who was quirkless. And quad. Izuku pursed his lips at that and sighed. Honestly, I believed he completely forgot about me the second I didn't show up for school during the start of 8th grade for him. All his life he was a dick who abused me for fun because I was an easy target, and he'd done this since we were 4. Ironically, it was always me chasing after him and trying to get him to like me. I was the one who always said he was going to be the greatest hero ever because I was so damn lonely. And quat. A whistle came from Sato at that. Damn dude, you sounded like a narcissist's wet dream. No wonder he went nuts when you weren't around. You were probably the only person left who would blow smoke up his ass when he got to UA. That being said, I'm curious how the hell other people treated him before he was a kid, because that's bound to be a can of worms. And quat. Izuku shrugged once more, feeling oddly numb to what he was about to say. If you really want the truth of it, people told him that he was special since the day he was born, and it went to his head because nobody ever corrected him. Everyone from the time he was little to up until UA, they all showered him in praise every day for what he could do because they wanted to ride his coattails or not be a subject to his anger. And quat. Izuku paused for a heartbeat and cringed as an old memory came back from his childhood. The one that still made him feel honestly bad for the guy. And, can you keep a secret? And quat. Sato placed a fist over his chest and raised his right hand. On my life I can. And quat. Izuku sighed and continued, unsure if he should really be talking about such a private thing about someone's life to a third party. His mom was also kind of abusive. She wasn't absolutely horrible, but he inherited his anger issues from her, and honestly I wouldn't be surprised if she had bipolar. Because at one moment she was loving and kind, then the next she'd start yelling at her husband or him over the tiniest issue. Now keep in mind that this happened while my mom and I were visiting, so you know they tried to downplay it. And quat. Izuku contemplated the memories and kept talking. She'd smack him, grab him by the hair. I've even seen her punch him in the gut when we were still in middle school. Granted, Katsuki never got it half as bad as his father, since she'd attack him way more. Like if you ever wanted to see a prime example of a beaten down husband, he'd be it to a T. I mean fuck. When I was a kid I would overhear phone calls she'd make to my mom to complain about him, and said multiple times that she'd kill him if he ever thought about leaving her. And quat. A silence came over the room as the two processed that information in full, both speaker and listener still taken aback by the harsh truths. Then after a time, Sato turned his eyes towards the wall and spoke. Well, that explains a lot. Do you think he's gotten better mentally now than when he was a kid, or did it get worse? And quat. Izuku gave another shrug as he leaned against the corner post. He's just as crazy now as when he was a kid. In fact, he's still doing the same shit where he'd pick on me if I ignored him when he had gotten bored. Only now he's the top hero in the nation and nobody wants to deal with his bullshit, so he focuses on me since I put up with him. And quat. A crack of the knuckles came from the quirkless man as he went on. Yet at the same time I don't think he's the worst person in the world. I just find him complicated because I'm fairly certain I'm the closest thing he has to an actual friend, and am I stupid for playing along because part of me doesn't want the guy to be sad in spite of all shit he did to me? And quat. A hum left the pro hero as he stood from his seat. Nah, you're just nice at heart. That, and it is kinda completely hard to hate him with how messed in the head he is. Enough about Bakugo for now. How's your life going so far? Everything okay with your girl? And quat. Izuku winced a little as phantom pain rushed through his skin at the memory of last night and couldn't help not to shiver in disgust at what he allowed to happen to him, while feeling a tightness in his pants that made him sit back down for dignity's sake. It's good, but she's been a lot more open about her tastes, and it was an experience to say the least. And quat. The sugar hero raised an eyebrow as he turned his full attention back to his sidekick with a slight curiosity. How so? Or do I not want to know? And quat. The green-haired man shrank back, utterly unsure if he should talk about what went down last night or that it was even appropriate to do so. Yet who else did he have to talk to? He loved Himiko without a doubt, but given how intoxicated she got roughing him up, she'd clearly be biased. He needed an outside opinion because being this baffled over what happened was bugging him. Pausing for a moment, he studied his boss and inhaled deeply to ready himself to speak. Well, I was actually hoping you'd be able to give me some advice because I think I may have crossed a line with myself. I know this isn't normal, but she asked for it and we discussed it at length. But, is letting your girlfriend cut you with a knife okay? And quat. The eyes of the hero went wide in shock at the words, as if he had trouble understanding them. No, that is not okay. You mean to tell me this chick slashed you with a knife and you allowed that? Dude, I'm not trying to be rude, but what the fuck? Why the hell would you let that happen? And quat. Izuku flinched with shame and shrugged. I just want to make her happy as best I can, and she's always talked about wanting to slice me. I mean, she's been real polite about it, and honestly it isn't bad. If anything, it hurts less than getting punched in the gut over and over again. And quat. Sato shook his head in amazement. You know there's easier ways to get laid, right? Most women aren't that nuts. And quat. Izuku glared for a moment, then sighed at his emotions. It's not about that, at least not completely. She needs blood, and she always comes to me with that need, that desire for a thrill, and the way she looks at me when we're together, I get to show how much she means to me. Granted, getting sliced up is a bit much since she always used to bite me, but I get to take care of her and I know she won't leave. And quat. He sighed and smiled in defeat at how admittedly crazy he sounded. I know how that sounds, But have you ever just wanted to give everything to someone? To bare your entire soul to them and have them give theirs in return? I'm not sure what it is about her, but I can't stop thinking about her most days and I just want to do everything to repay her for making my life better. Again Sato shook his head now with a bit of pity. Izuku, with all due respect, you sound like you're obsessed with this chick and I'm not one to shame, but she doesn't sound all that great. Like, would you ever consider marrying a woman like that who does that kind of crazy shit? Izuku raised an eyebrow, now looking genuinely perplexed. Yes, I've told her as much. That and how badly I want to have kids with her. Now the Sugar Rush user flinched at his words before observing the words and filling his eyes with pity. Is she your first experience with a relationship by any chance? The eyebrow remained up for a moment until a mournful twist came to him as he darted his eyes to the side. In a manner of speaking, I almost had something back in my teens but that got derailed. Now she's all I have. Understanding showed on Sato's face as he crossed his powerful arms. Alright, so how exactly did you say you wanted to marry her? Izuku pursed his lips and fiddled with his hands. It isn't like I proposed on the spot, I just said I planned to one day, and she was more than a little taken aback by it. For the longest time she's been alone, she doesn't have friends or any family. I'm really all she has, and so that seemed a bit much to her. Sato studied him and spoke rather coldly, as if he smelt something wrong. This chick has no friends, no family, and she's into carving you up like a roasted ham. Izuku, there's something wrong with this woman. There's no way anyone is that isolated without a damn good reason. Izuku mentally wavered under the pressure and eked out a somewhat meek response, feeling just in defending his point while feeling oddly wrong somehow. Well, her quirk revolves around blood and she's an 8 on the Lindsay scale, so she had a history of mental instability. But she medicates with animal blood, so she's fine. Her family kicked her out at 14 and everybody else she knew died in the calamity. There was a sudden expression of dreadful shock on Sato's face, one that contained a deep, primal fear that just as soon turned into a glaring, baneful anger as he stepped towards him, the massive height difference becoming dangerously apparent as he stood there studying his sidekick. Does her quirk allow her to turn into other people if she drinks their blood? The words were laced with a suspicion compounded by a slight threat to his voice, like the merest suggestion of whomever he was referencing brought violence to his mind. It only became clearer when Izuku met his eyes and saw an old, wrathful fury that was coupled with concern. In an instant Izuku was reminded of all the bad Himiko had claimed to have done in the past and found fear within himself for her sake. So he smiled weakly while masking the emotion like he'd done countless times before in life and answered, "No, it just makes her shoot out this red goo from her skin that lets her use it like armor. I think she calls it blood shield, but I haven't asked too much." Sato continued to stare with his gaze hitting like a sledgehammer to the mask Izuku was wearing, as if he already knew the truth and was simply waiting for an honest confession. Then his brows creased and he asked another question that cut through the tension like a dagger. "You wouldn't happen to be dating Ochako alongside this chick, would you?" Now Izuku balked in full fashion, his mind utterly unprepared for that to be brought up in any context, much less by someone who absolutely should know nothing about it. Against his better skills and old habits, a blush formed in his cheeks as he was found out. How the fuck? Relief filtered on the hero's face at the reaction, relaxing his posture and smiling with a sigh as he laughed. "Well shit, that's good. If she's around then you're alright. Sorry about that, man. I thought you were involved with some villain from back in the war." Izuku continued to chatter in perplexion and shame as he kept going with his embarrassment still fresh. "That doesn't answer how the hell you know that. I never told anybody about it, so how?" Sato cut him off with a shrug. "I overheard her and some other chick when I called you up last time to try and get Bakugo into that mixer. Like I said, I don't judge, but I gotta ask how the heck you managed to pull that off?" Izuku pursed his lips while his mind rattled, unsure of what to say, yet glad the topic had steered away from his lover. "A gentleman never tells." Sato raised a hand in acceptance as he exited the ring and made his down to a cooler to grab some water. "Fair enough." Suddenly his eyes hardened again, growing distant and troubled as his fingers clenched around the bottle. He turned with that same dire seriousness and spoke with an authority only a war vet could have. "I need to show you something." Without another word he set the bottle down and walked towards his office. Izuku, unsure of what to say, followed after as Sato opened the case where his old suit was displayed and pulled out an accordion folder from a drawer under the lid. Immediately he started to flick through it until he found whatever he was searching for and pulled out a paper. He peered over it for a moment before handing it to his sidekick. "Here, this was the villain I was talking about." Shifting his eyes from his employer to what was in his hands, Izuku was met by a form that had been taken from the Commission's criminal database, and in the header right on top of the page, it listed a name, Himiko Toga, and under it was a picture of his girlfriend, who looked younger judging by the lack of stress lines on her face and the school uniform she had on. Blinking at it, He read the information in detail and it contained a general section of her quirk dubbed transform by the registry, which was fitting enough. It also contained a shorthand list of her crimes, which was everything she told him about, such as over 80 counts murder in the first degree, 1 count of capital villainy, 3 counts of domestic terrorism, 30 counts of torture, over 80 counts of unnatural practices with a corpse, 100 counts of felony stalking, and a lot more petty things such as shoplifting and theft. However, it was the known affiliations section that made him pause. At the top labeled Paranormal Liberation Front, Carmen Division, which he already suspected. Yet under that was another one labeled as League of Villains and Quad. It was then Izuku had to reread the paper to ensure his eyes weren't fooling him. It struck him like a light punch to the gut as he managed to look back up at his employer. There's no way she was in the League of Villains. I thought they were all dead. And Quad. Sato shook his head solemnly with anger boiling in his eyes as he took the paper back and returned it to the folder. Not all of them. Out of every one of those monsters, she was the only one who managed to escape justice. Worse yet, the commission decided to let her out of Tartarus due to quirk-based insanity after one of our own vouched for that monster. She's still out there roaming free, and I just want you to be aware of the shit that's out there. Alright? And Quad. Izuku said nothing as his heart pounded slightly as the initial shock remained and a cloud of apprehension hung over him. He was silent for a minute as he contemplated the facts and found a vein of anger that had gone undisturbed for some time, but he inhaled and calmed himself. He loved this woman and she had been honest since day one. However, there would be an uncomfortable conversation coming home with him. Shaking his own head, Izuku took a seat at his desk and opened up the forms that needed processing. I appreciate it, but let's try and get this month's paperwork sorted out. And Quad. Hours passed as he dove into the comfortable numbness of bureaucracy, losing himself in the information like a large puzzle while pushing the issue bothering him aside for the time. He wasn't sure when he got a tap on the shoulder, but when he looked up from his desk he saw darkness come through the window and Ojiro and Shoji standing in the room with Sato smiling down at him. You feel up to heading to Toshi's with us tonight? And Quad. Izuku stretched his arms out as he managed to get up from his seat and stand, not realizing how sore he was. Sure, I can do that. And Quad. Taking a quick 5-minute shower to wash off the grime of his body after his initial workout and dressing himself, Izuku walked with the trio to their usual stomping grounds, and despite Ojiro's incessant pestering, he was silent. What else could he be after finding out what he did? He adored the woman, and it wasn't like it was an absolute revelation since he knew from the start she had a violent, prolific past filled with murder and blood. Yet he always assumed it was a smaller, less horrible group she belonged to, like the Yakuza or some other petty gang. However, it really made sense now that all the pieces were here. Why else would both Kachan and Lemillion be involved at the time unless it was massive? Why else would she be thrown in Tartarus and not a reform camp like other teenaged criminals? Yet, what the fuck should he do? He didn't want to leave and she hadn't done anything to make him think otherwise. But, there was still that old fury from losing everything because of the League of Villains. The PLA was one thing because that was a large, disorganized group that labeled themselves as an army but dispersed the second day they attacked. The League was a whole other thing, a far more darker entity, and his lover was a founding member. If he was honest with himself, a large part of him wanted nothing more than to walk back home and slap her across the face as hard as he could and start yelling and berating her simply because she was at fault for what happened to the world. In a strange way, she ruined his life and cost him what could have been a bright and happy future, but that was in the past. She hadn't been unfaithful and Himiko loved him like nobody else. Fuck, he felt safe enough to literally go confront her about this, which had to say a lot about him and her. But he had to say something, right? He couldn't just keep this tucked away and hope it never gets brought up, because he knew it would, or more likely she'd smell it on him and he'd spill everything like he always did when it came to her. That was the thing, the other part of him that wanted to run back and reassure her, to throw himself at her worries and show his love for her. He found that her past didn't bother him nearly as it should, and stupidly, he simply wanted her. For all her horror and pain and issues, he just couldn't resist the thought of her, how good it was to be in her presence and be in her arms. He wanted nothing more than to go back and finally make love to her, perhaps because he was scared of her leaving and wanted to give something. Yet that was the overly attached side of his emotions that had wrapped around her like a vice, while the logical and moral side screamed he should be affronted by her past actions and do something, anything that wasn't catering to her mistakes because of his devotion and lust. He wanted to cast her away for a time and embrace her and never let go despite the evil staining her hands in the same breath. He clenched his fists as they finally entered the bar, finding it crowded with the usual faces, and the lads roamed towards their regular table. But Izuku paused when he saw a slightly alien-looking face peer at him by the counter of a high stool and smile, waving over to him. Looking back, he saw his group had gotten into their own conversation and decided to follow the mutant's instructions. Taking the seat next to which had been left open, he ordered a single beer and turned towards Mina, hopefully without his inner turmoil showing. So, it's been a while. You've been doing okay? And Quad. She smiled and shrugged as she sipped her half glass of whiskey, seeming for all the world as happy as can be as her mind could allow. I'm doing just fine, Izu boy. Life's pretty cool and that isn't just the booze talking. Although a weird question, do you mind if I ask about what you and your girlfriend get up to, you know, with all the blood and stuff ? And quat. A flare of self-consciousness came as a phantom pain rocked over his skin at the memory of last night. Why do you ask ? And quat. She shrugged again and gave another sip. Because a friend of mine from high school managed to get herself wrapped up in some weird polygamous relationship with a dude and some chick with a thing for blood, and I'm wondering what the hell makes someone want to do that. And quat. Izuku paused as he held in the urge to curse. How the fuck did so many people know? Furthermore, why does this have to be on top of the bullshit he just learned a few hours ago? Should he leave? Where the hell did he have to go? His apartment? Maybe he should go check up on Ochako. After all, the woman knows way more about Himiko's past than he did, and she likely would appreciate the company. Later. For now, just play along and learn what can be found. Ah, I see. Well, I'm not exactly the right sort to ask since I didn't specifically go looking for someone like that. We kind of fell into each other's laps and she was just really into that stuff, and I love her enough that I let her have her way with me. And quat. A hum came from the heroine before curiosity found its way to her void-colored eyes. But what exactly do you love about her so much that none of it is a deal breaker? I mean, you can care about someone all you want, but there comes a point where they cross a line. Like if she, I don't know, decided to cut you with a knife all over your body, what keeps you from just getting up and leaving? And quat. A heavy blush came over his cheeks and Izuku managed to sip some of his liquid courage as honesty came out. Speaking from personal experience of what you just described, part of it is wanting to be the cause of joy for my partner. When we're together like that and she's showing me who she is, I know her only focus on anything in the world is me. Now granted, that can be rather unsettling if things get out of hand. But the act of willingly giving yourself over to another who you absolutely adore and fulfilling a need only you can provide, that's worth almost any pain. And quat. Izuku went on as he sought to vent some lingering memories and their strange emotions. The pleasure alone you can give someone is goddamn wonderful. Like last night, I was laying down and I let her slice me a bit and she was so aroused that she started to shake. Have you ever been that excited that you have to physically control your body to move? It's literally one of the best feelings in the world, and I managed to give that to her by simply letting her have her way with me. And quat. Mine stared at him in bewildered amazement as she soon finished the last of her cup and spoke. You really are loyal to damn fault, aren't ya? I gotta ask Izuku, doesn't any of that seem like major red flags? I mean, someone has to be really fucked in the head to like seeing their partner bleed, quirk or no quirk. Like what if she slipped up and cut an artery? You'd be dead. And quat. He shrugged and drank to ease his lips. Then I'd be dead. It wasn't a spontaneous thing. We discussed it for hours and went over what we both wanted, and she took care of the first aid stuff. I agreed because she's my partner and I love her and she's asked for this before. Besides, she's been nothing but trustworthy. And quat. The acid heroine raised an eyebrow and shot back. You've only known this girl for barely a year and you're willing to put up with that kind of physical pain, just to make her feel good? Don't you think you're giving a bit too much a little too early? And quat. Izuku raised an eyebrow in turn. No, if anything it feels like I haven't given enough. I love this girl and I just wish I could have a stronger way of showing it. And quat. It was then Mina's eyes went wide. Dude, you've literally let her carve you like a turkey and drink your blood. That doesn't sound like love to me. It sounds like a really unhealthy and possibly life-threatening relationship. I mean, what more can you do? And quat. He crossed his arms almost defiantly. By giving her a family, by binding myself to her in totality. And quat. It was then Mina paused as if having been shown some disgusting secret, which soon came as a low, judgmental anger. You can't be serious, dude. You've only known her for barely a year and you want to have kids with her? A chick who gets off on seeing you in pain? And quat. Izuku raised his ire to speak, but withdrew it as he realized through the haze of his emotions how it sounded to one more level-headed than him. Well, not this second, but maybe in a few years. Don't get me wrong, she has her issues, but everything else she's done for me, my life wouldn't be nearly as good if it weren't for her. I mean, she's just so wonderful to me that I can't picture my life without her. And quat. The mutant narrowed her brow questioningly as she waved at the server for another glass. But then what if she left? And quat. Izuku froze like he had been struck across the face. He stared at the crime fighter in the utmost perplexion like she was speaking Greek. What? And quat. Mina spoke again, more than a little unnerved by his reaction. I said, what if she left? You know, broke up with you? As shitty as it is, that stuff does happen, more often than you'd think. I mean, just look at me and Kiri boy, we were together for years and survived through a war together. We assumed everything would always be okay, but then one random day, we had one stupid little argument out of 1,000 we had over our lives and it finally all ended. He packed his shit up and left me and everything we did behind. And quat. Izuku went stiff in his back as panic filled his eyes, his hand wrapping around the beer bottle so tightly his fingers turned white. He was distant and plagued by an unendingly deep fear that left him almost gaunt in the face. Then came an affronted anger that served to burn the crippling fear as he grit his teeth before calming himself. That won't happen. She wouldn't leave me, not now or ever. And quat. A bright, understanding sympathy showed in Mina's otherworldly eyes and she spoke in a far softer, kinder tone. I believed the same thing about Kirishima and I was wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about your relationship, but you have to always prepare for the worst because life is rarely that kind. But, let me ask Izuku, if she did leave you, what would you do? And quat. He paused as he stared at the woman, finding someone who was similarly hurt in life and felt a gentle hand touch his if only to help dispel the dread through physical contact. He sighed and gripped it as the most painful fact worked out of his mind, glad to simply have an anchor to the sad truth of himself. I'd kill myself. I was about to jump off the Kongu Bridge last winter because I was so sad and pissed and done with everything, but I ran into her by a stroke of luck and she talked me out of it, and over time I just fell deeper and deeper in love with her. She was literally the only one who encouraged me to go work for my dream, and if it weren't for her then I'd still be the same person I was. And quat. He inhaled as he continued, glad to just get the weight off his shoulders. Mina, I owe everything to this woman and she hasn't asked a damn thing in return. She's a demon and I know she's dangerous, but she's everything to me and I'm everything to her. And quat. Again he paused and looked around, finding no one focusing on them. He leaned into her ear and whispered as a slight panic entered his voice. I love her so much that if she asked me to kill someone I probably would. I'd maim myself and die 1,000 times over and over to keep her safe, and I don't why. I've never felt this way about anyone in a long time and is something wrong with me? She hasn't asked for anything like that and I know she'd be horrified and disappointed if I told her this, but I would. I'd burn down the whole world if she asked. And quat. He pulled away with his turmoil showing clearly as he stared back at the mutant pleasingly, gripping her hand like it was a lifeline. Am I just nuts? Because I know normal people don't think like this. Even with all her issues and past horrors, I'm still psychotically in love with her. Like I'll get antsy if she isn't around and I just want to rip anything that keeps us away. And quat. A thumb rolled over his knuckles, one almost inhumanly soft and supple as Mina smiled warmly at him, seeming to banish all the darkness away. You're not nuts, Izuku. You just sound like a guy who's been put down all his life who finally found something to cling to. Granted it is a tad intense, but you strike me as a guy who never got to express his emotions. Besides that, you just went through a traumatic experience when you met her, so it's natural you'd get attached. And quat. She gained a more stern yet somehow still relaxed tone that sounded reaffirming in the best way possible. But that doesn't excuse her going at you like a slasher villain. You can love someone and still stand up for yourself. If you're uncomfortable then you have the right to say so. And if they make you feel unsafe then you're better off somewhere else. And quat. The air grew a tad less muddled and Izuku a little less burdened as he answered. Thanks, I needed to hear that. And quat. She smiled again and smirked as she gave a soft jab at his arm. No problem, Green Bean, though I got a favor to ask. There's this class reunion happening next week and I need you to be my +1 since I'm sure Ricky and Bakugo will drag you along anyway. And quat. He grinned in return and lifted his drink. If you'll have me, of course. It seems more than fair. And quat. Again she tapped him on the arm. Good, then I'll see you this Friday. You feel like staying for a spell? I'm down to keep talking. And quat. Izuku kept smiling, but it lessened somewhat as the things he learned came back and pressed on his soul. Eventually he pursed his lips and regretfully stood from the counter. Sorry, but I have a lot of stuff to get done. I'll see you Friday though. And quat. Mina raised a hand to protest, but relented with a mildly happy resignation on her face. Alright, Green Bean, I'll see you later. And quat. Taking leave of the bar after excusing himself from Sato's group, Izuku made his way to the nearest train station and boarded, finding all his worries returning in full. What the hell should he do about this? Perhaps he should go to Ochako about this, but who knows the consequences of such an act. Fuck, it might even get Himiko thrown back in Tartarus if word got out to the commission. Then again, wouldn't they have forbid her from having any romantic relationships if that was the case? Wouldn't Todoroki or Ochako just have relocated her the second he got close to her? He wasn't breaking any rules by simply knowing about her past, he hoped, so maybe it was alright to talk to them? Fuck, maybe he should call up Kachan and prod him for knowledge on Himiko without naming why he actually wanted the information, but that wouldn't result in anything good. Then there was how the girl herself would react if he went anywhere with that. Knowing her, she'd be outraged, or maybe she'd be murderous. No, that was stupid beyond belief. Himiko was a killer and downright sadistic when she wanted to be, but after all she's told him, almost begging to unload the baggage, she wouldn't kill him for knowing who she was. But should he stay? Being chained in spirit to an assassin and a murderer was one thing. Being involved with the person who was involved in ruining everything was another. It wasn't like he was utterly unlovable. Aki proved that in his youth and Ochako proved it now. People wanted him, maybe not a lot, but some, and it was like Mina and Sato said, other people would doubtless be less of a hassle. Fuck, he still had Asui's number in his phone and he could go to Mina for a new relationship if need be, They were lacking in the trouble that would come along with staying with Himiko. Yet even as he thought that, a large part of him loathed the idea. So what if she was a league member? She was still Himiko, the same woman who lifted him up and loved him endlessly. She was there when he had nothing and stayed when he broke down. She was his everything, and he knew that deep in his heart like an iron-bound fact, yet his mind fought his heart even if it was a losing battle. She was a dead weight to him, and a person so low in morality that she literally tried to burn the world down. And in a truly strange way, as he considered it, he was envious of it. To take a stand against everything and say fuck you to all the thing pushing you down and make them bleed. He knew that if he was in his teens and they had met, he likely would have idolized her. To have that courage to go forth even at your weakest and be strong enough to take the lives of those in your way for a better tomorrow that you can see. The same Gestapo motherfuckers who got fat enforcing the status quo. If he was even a fraction of that, then nobody would have hurt him, and maybe he could have been changed something about the world. Why the hell was she so much stronger than him? Why did she take all the horrible bullshit life threw at her and not even flinch while he crumpled like paper? Except, she did falter one time, and it was because of him, wasn't it? How much did it have to hurt her, a person who faced the whole world, to think he had left her? How much did he have to mean to her in order for her to scream and cry to the point her strength, her very composure which she relied on, was gone? He thought about it more, about how devastated the mere thought of her leaving him had left him, how he couldn't breathe and wanted to lash out at anything. What would her anguish be if he left? How much worse would her sorrow be, if she lost her dignity merely from assuming he'd moved on after only a few months and sobbed in his arms? What would her reaction be to his complete departure? Wouldn't she move on though? There were other people like him, people who could replace him, so why should he worry? But, again came that jealousy which made him curl his lips back in a snarl. He loathed that idea no matter how hard he pushed it. Nobody would have her accept him. Nobody was good enough except him, and the god of luck and fate pity the fool who thought otherwise, because he certainly would not. Nobody else was like her, nobody else had her personality quirks, her wisdom, her beauty, her unyielding devotion she kept tight to her chest. There was only one Himiko, and there was only one of him, and he'd sooner be dead than anyone else think they could have her. Calming himself with a deep inhale, Izuku leaned back on the bench and considered it again with a more collected manner, expelling the lie that he could or would go anywhere else. He placed his hands over his face and sighed. Alright, so leaving wasn't something he could bear, meaning he had to confront her about this. How the fuck is that going to go? Would she be angry that he knew who she was? Happy? Ashamed? Would she want him to simply drop it, or would she be completely open about her past? Thinking more on it, he found a stupid thought enter his mind, and he wanted to slap himself for being so ridiculous. However, was the whole reason she was so averse to letting him go the full mile because he didn't know who she was originally? That seemed like a damn good reason, but now that he knew and was willing to stay, would he finally get to have her? God, he sounded pathetic. If he was going to stay with her, it wouldn't be over getting to screw her. There were easier ways of getting laid, and if he was willing to be her partner despite her past, then it'd be out of love, not his damn ego. Sighing and lowering his hands as the train rolled to a stop, Izuku decided to move forward regardless of anything else and stepped off at the station. Taking the usual way brought 20 minutes before he arrived at her apartment complex, but it felt way longer than that as sweat began to grease his palms. Eventually he did arrive at her building with his heart beating wildly like so many times before when he was in such an uncomfortable situation. The closest he could think of was either the night before the calamity or the one time he almost told Kachan to fuck off, only this time he had to see it through. Taking a moment to collect himself, Izuku reached to knock on the door, only to have it swing open of its own accord right as his skin touched the oak and Himiko appeared with knife in hand. She was dressed in the same crusty pajamas she usually wore, and she smiled warmly at him, the force of which seemed to erode some of her reserve as she leapt over to hug him. "Hey mister, bet you missed me a ton, didn't you?" Quat. There was so much strength to her hold that it felt wonderful, yet instead of returning it and hoisting her inside like he had gotten into the habit of doing, he awkwardly stood there unsure of what to do. She saw this and looked at him with confusion and more than a little neediness, like she was eager to be picked up. However, Izuku merely walked inside, leaving her to stare with even more perplexion as she shut the door behind her when she re-entered her home. They continued to gaze at each other for a few scant moments before Izuku turned his attention to the walls as his anxiety gathered in his chest. Himiko stood by the door, sliding the knife back in its sheath, and gazed at his back, a self-conscious tint entering her voice. "So I called up Cheeky while you were away and said she wanted some more time alone to gather her thoughts. She also said something about some reunion happening in a week that she needed to mentally prepare for. Which means we'll be alone for a bit. And Quat." He said nothing and continued to stare at the drywall as his fingers began to clench to vent out the emotions. Again Himiko spoke, clearly unnerved by his reaction. "With that being the case, I figured we could watch a few movies to kill time, maybe even order a pizza or two. And Quat." He was silent still. The woman inhaled at that and flexed her own fingers with an audible pop as a certain nervousness entered her voice. "Look, if this is about last night, I'm sorry if I went overboard. I just wanted to show you what I like and that really scratched an itch. We can do other stuff for a while until you feel up for it again. And quote. Nothing came of her response and he continued to fixate on the wall. Now she took a step forward as her feet tapped off the floor with the same uncomfort in her voice. Come on Zuzu, did I really scare you last night? Tell me what's got you so weird. And quote. Izuku turned at that with his eyes bouncing to the walls as Himiko was halfway to where he stood. He paused as his lips moved independently of his teeth, almost in a strange attempt to lessen the clamp over his voice. For a moment he looked into her golden eyes and sighed as he began to ease it out, hoping this wasn't about to become a mess. Himiko, can I ask you something about your past? And quote. She flinched at that and the weight in his voice before readjusting herself and spoke without a hint of hesitation. Of course. And quote. He hesitated as the weight of his question crushed his soul. When you managed to get out of Tartarus and enter your parole, did you change your name? And quote. She paused at that like he had slapped her, looking almost taken aback by it. Yet to his surprise she answered, yes, I had to, otherwise people would have hunted me down. And quote. She studied him as sadness entered her yellow eyes. Would you happen to have figured out what it was? And quote. There wasn't an ounce of threat or danger in the question, only a deep shame and a bitter resignation that coupled with an awkwardness gathering in the air. Izuku waited until he was sure he could speak without stumbling over his words and having them be as gentle as possible. Is your real last name Toga instead of Ito? And quote. She shook her head solemnly and avoided his eyes. Yes. And quote. It was like an anvil had simultaneously been lifted from him and then dropped on his shoulders. Were you originally a member of the League of Villains? And quote. Again she nodded, now with her knuckles turning white. Yeah, I was. And quote. So it was true, she was one of those people who ruined the world. Oddly as he looked at her, the only thing he could think to do was shrug. Okay then, I just wanted to clear that up. And quote. Himiko met his eyes again and was greeted by an uneasy smile instead of how 99% of people would react. She blinked, not sure what to make of it judging by her expression. You're not mad? And quote. Again he shrugged and smiled as earnestly as he could. Kind of. It's a little hard to overlook the whole almost took over the world thing, but so far that's your only failing I can see. So 1 out of 20. And quote. He paused and laughed a bit as he kicked at the floor. I really just wanted to make sure, but that aside, you think pineapple would sound good as a topping? And quote. She blinked again, obviously taken aback by his actions. You don't want to ask me any questions or maybe scream at me a little? And quote. He raised his hand to answer, but halted as his smile wavered and a certain seriousness entered his voice. Can you tell me why the start of the calamity had to happen on the day it did and not a day later? And quote. Himiko flinched again at the harshness in his voice and responded. It was because all the soldiers got tired of waiting and if we chose another day then they would have just abandoned the command structure and attacked anyway. And quote. He glared at her with a heavy resentment and a moralistic hate that bared his teeth, drilling into her spirit for a time with popping fists. Then he closed his eyes, inhaled and let it go. Without another word he strolled forward and embraced her, crushing her to him. His voice was soft yet still held some lingering of that fury, if only by a hair. That's all I ever wanted to know. And quote. His hands moved to her face and he kissed her, letting himself drown in his emotions as he held her and shifting his hands around. Then he let her go and moved to the entrance to remove his shoes. Anyway, you feel like watching Casablanca? I heard it was a really good film from back in the day. And quote. Himiko continued to stare at him in wide-eyed astonishment before he arose and smuggled her to the sofa and brought her down with him, spooning and kissing her like nothing was wrong. Eventually she answered as she clamped down hard on his arm that was fondling her breasts like it was ungodly important to her. Sure. And quote. Izuku had never felt so naked in all his life. Even when Himiko carved him up or Katsuki burned him in his youth there was never such a cloud of lingering panic. He wasn't in direct danger and he was only sitting at his desk doing his day job, but the pressure on his mind was intense to the point he had trouble focusing on his work. Yet who could blame him? His girlfriend was the last surviving member of the League of Villains. That was something he never imagined happening as a concept. He assumed they were all dead because Katsuki killed them, but Himiko managed to get away and fall into his life 6 years later. It had passed in a blur, mainly because he wanted to ignore the problem so damn badly that he tried to digest as fast as he could, and at least Sato's agency gave him nothing by desk work last Sunday so he could escape for a while. Now at his nearly done job with a project list shorter than a pencil, he was forced to be subject to his anxieties and confusions. Just what the hell should he do? He loved, that was too weak a word if he was honest, adored her, or maybe he was addicted to her? It certainly felt that way and he savored it, regardless of her past life. Yet maybe that was the problem, his emotions were clouding his judgment. He was always taught to be logical, to think with reality in mind. If he did through, the reality was that this was one of the happiest and, dare he say, safest points in his life. There hadn't been a day throughout the entire year where he stared down the drop of a bridge or glared at those around him. Those may as well been alien to him now, and it was thanks to her. She stuck by him, loved him and vowed to protect him. which was something nearly nobody else had done in his life. As sad as it was to say, Himiko had turned into his whole reason for living. Sure, he had his sidekick gig, but it was nothing compared to her and all the wonder she brought to him. There had barely been a day when they hadn't talked, even less when he hadn't accosted her apartment simply to be with her. He lived there more than his own apartment, which he nearly forgot about some days. It was strange, but that woman became, albeit slowly over time, an indisputable part of his life that merged itself with the very foundation. He literally couldn't picture himself without her, no matter how hard he tried, and he questioned if that was a bad thing or not. On one hand, he absolutely loved her in spite of her flaws and admittedly unsettling tastes because she made his life so grand. On the other, she was partly responsible for the deaths of thousands, ruined the image of heroism culture, almost dropped all of civilized society into a tyrannical hellscape filled with the worst sort of sufferings, and aided in releasing tens of thousands of criminals who had killed, raped and destroyed the lives people worked to get, along with ruining his first chance at happiness. So what should he think? He wasn't going to turn on her, but just how should he deal with it? He knew she was a felon from the start, and a pretty bad one at that, yet to be a member of the worst group in recent history. Goddamn. How much deeper did her rabbit hole of a past go? Did she fucking eat people? Form a cult? Better yet, was she still in contact with any one of those old villain contacts? Was she still actively a criminal? Probably not, since she barely leaves her apartment. But why of all women in this world did he have to be attached to literally one of the worst villains of an era? Why couldn't he have run into Mina or some other chick at the bridge? Why couldn't he have been saved by a normal woman who didn't carry all this shit? But then again, maybe he was meant for her and she was meant for him. After all, the god of fate drives things in strange ways, so perhaps things were meant to be this way for the two of them? Yet, it wasn't like he couldn't find someone else to replace her as a partner. He still had that choice regardless of fate, and could literally just delete Himiko's number, move and never speak to her again. He still had and would always have that power and option, but he didn't want it. She wasn't some interchangeable cog that could be thrown away on a whim. No one is, but her least of all. Nobody else would be like her, and he was certain nobody else would stand by him like her, and it wasn't just the fickle happiness that made him stay either. He had chosen to build something profound and substantial which would last throughout his life, that would end when his heart stopped beating. He was too dedicated, too clingy and too eager for devotion to ever be anything less than what he is. He wanted a woman like Himiko who he would do anything for, kill anyone for, and never, ever be cast aside in return. Yes, he could get some boring, paper-thin pleasure from some easy women if he actually tried for once, but it would be nothing to him. There'd be no love, no actually deep affection, only a short, plastic meetup that'd drain his soul. That's why he needed a woman like Himiko, and he'd be dead before he gave her up or gave her to anyone. Thinking on it as his fingers paused on the keyboard, Izuku saw a memory of a time before that, before he met Himiko, when he felt emotions so damn similar. He hazily recalled through the lens of a half-drunken stupor the weight of a 2x4 in his hand and a broken beer bottle in the other, shouting out promises of murder and oaths of passion to a group of thugs as blood wafted on the night air, while a woman of scarlet scales tried to talk him out of it from behind him with tears in her eyes. His fingers curled into tight fists and was struck by that same damnable regret that came after he somehow won that night, and things grew better for months until that one cursed moment of hesitation ruined the old foundations he worked and bled to make with the coming of chaos. A chaos Himiko was partly responsible for. For an instant he was 15 again, with only one other person in the world after he decided enough was enough of his old friend's bullshit. He was shorter than almost everyone else, younger and with not a soul he knew, save for the one who he met in the dying sun on that lonely track. The same one who was so jovial and full of life, so strange and kind, with powers so alien it astounded and even aroused him at times. The person who pushed him to improve and taunted him into growing and offered a future he wanted more than anything. A woman with such passion and loyalty that it warmed his heart. The one who he would give anything to and would give anything in return, his ruby dragon. He saw her smile as her all too human face glowed with such warmth as they embraced, sure that nothing would ever tear them apart. Then he was brought back to reality as he stared at the computer. His voice was low, barely more than a whisper, as he let out a curse that was suffused with a near lifetime of pain and regret through gritted teeth. Damn it ... and quat. Resentment festered in his chest as he brought his fingers to move. That time was long dead, so it was pointless mourning or avenging what could have been. He had Himiko now, and even if she was a monster who inadvertently ruined his past, it didn't mean she couldn't build the future with him. Thinking about it with more than a substantial amount of anger, Izuku found himself feeling pissed and impatient for once, specifically with her. How much horrible shit has he accepted and done for her sake and barely gotten anything in return? Granted, he knew a good relationship wasn't about asking for things in return, and he was happy to give. He wanted something for his efforts. It wasn't like he expected money or anything horrible, but he had to get something out of this silent clusterfuck he walked into. Yet, to him it was like he was getting something simply by Himiko being herself, but he wanted more from her. After all, He willingly got cut up for a blowjob he didn't even ask for and overlooked so many horrible things she told him about. If he was anyone else, he would have left the second she described killing a man in a hospital, much less learning that she was the last League member. He knew it was petty, but he wanted something for it, something that he could use to show his love even more with how he desired to show it. Not through blood or cuts or bites or mere words or hard actions like she did, but something that made it clear how deeply he cherished her, that she was forever his, and may any fucker who tests that hope they're ready to lose everything they hold dear. Brewing with slow typing, 3 things came to him, each outrageous, but felt right, even if they were insane. The first and most outlandish was marriage, which was fueled by his furious desire to claim her, to keep her by his side until death did them part. The second was having children, or more specially, getting her pregnant so that he could hold her to the world and say, "This is mine, she is mine, and you can't do shit about it." Admittedly, he found a strange pride in that thought of her being the mother to his children. The third was far more mundane and maybe a little stupid in comparison. Maybe he could get her a promise ring? It wasn't nearly as drastic as the other ideas, and he loathed it because it was so lacking, so substandard. Though knowing her, she was likely going to say yes to the third idea, but he didn't want that alone. He wanted to give everything he had and gain everything she was. He wanted to unleash all the pent-up emotions he'd been barely letting out and had been swatted away by her. He wanted to prove his love even if it was blood-soaked, and by God did he want to take it, to take her and hold her close endlessly. Although now that he considered it with less fervor, Izuku questioned whether that was his emotions talking or his cock, because he knew himself well enough that he'd been lusting after her chastity for a long time, and partly because he did want that. He wanted to go deep inside her and just stake his eternal claim the same way she did with her bites. He wanted to own her like he allowed her to own him. Or maybe he was just fucked up in the head. Like, really? His first idea after learning who she was is to impregnate her or carry her to an altar, especially after the whole knife thing that happened last weekend? Was he just crazy? Who honestly suggests to themselves, yes, my partner is a former member of the worst villain group in history and was a highly skilled assassin with a kill count over 60 with a mental dependence on blood so strong that it's their main fetish. Better have kids with them ASAP! And quat. Honestly, it isn't like people are lined up to take either him or her, and she certainly isn't going anywhere, so maybe he could afford to slow down? They both had time, perhaps start off small with the little things? Sure, he absolutely would bring up sex, likely the second he was inside her apartment, but that could go at its own pace. Maybe they should go visit Ochako since she's been lonely, or go to a park? Anything that would make them closer. Then again, he was talking about a romantic life with a high-ranking villain and a sadist, which should, logically, make him pause and stop to consider if this was the right choice. But it wasn't like he had a lot of people who would understand the good and the bad of what he and Himiko did. Fuck, with the way things were going, he'd likely have to cut off some of those people for her sake. But he still wanted to ask someone bluntly what the hell he should do, or if this relationship was actually good for him. He shook his head at one person who came to mind, and if there ever was a reckoning, it would certainly come from her. Aki would just pick him up like a rag doll and carry him to her home without a word and sit him down and talk until things were better. She did as much when he confided in her about his second attempt and kept him there until he got out of that darkness. A smile found its way to him as he imagined how furious she'd be with him and how much her old, over-animated tics would just fly out in a wave of hand gestures and shouts. He missed her sometimes, but what could be done? The past is the past. Now, all that was left was to move forward, and that doubtlessly included Himiko. His mind continued to turn, and he wondered if she would be okay when he got home. If anything, she seemed more shaken by his discovery than him, which was saying something. Did she need a day to collect herself before they talked, or should he call off early today and go see her now? Would they just continue like nothing happened, or were there big conversations heading their way? Shit. When should they tell Ochako that he knew? Should they? Did they have to inform Todoroki that he knew who she was for Himiko's parole agreements? Would he have to sit in front of a judge and make a case? Would Kachan find out somehow? The thought of that sent a shiver of fear down his spine and aroused a fury in him, but it was pushed aside. There were other things to worry about than that fucker, and right now all Izuku wanted was to clear his mind, and by some miracle the work bell dinged, meaning his shift was over. Blinking at the screen, he saw the clock was at 4 p.m., which confused him greatly since it read as 12 p.m. the last time he looked. Not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, Izuku signed out of his computer and turned towards the door, only to meet Tensen standing behind him with a grin. "Hey man, you looked pretty out of it today. Is everything alright?" And quat. Izuku froze at the redhead's words, then inhaled to ease himself, sounding far more well than he felt. "Yeah, just dealing with some drama at home. It's stupid stuff really." And quat. The young worker tilted his head to the side questioningly. "What kind of stupid stuff?" And quat. Izuku cast his eyes off to the floor and to the side with discomfort raw in his throat. "Things that happened during the calamity. I found out something about my girlfriend from back then, and let's just say she had a hard time of it, and now I'm trying to figure out what to do. It's Concerning is all. And quat. A hand was placed on his shoulder and Tenzin gave him a sympathetic glance, looking like he knew what he meant. I get it, my girlfriend had to end somebody back then and she still goes to therapy for it. The war was a messed up time for everyone, so you aren't alone. I have the number to her support group if you want it. And quat. Izuku gave a somewhat warm smile at that and shrugged. Thanks but no thanks, she's not exactly the type. Right now I don't know if she needs space or if I should go talk to her about it. And quat. His coworker gave a smile at that and patted him on the shoulder, gesturing towards the door. I say give her a bit of time, but it's really your choice. Anyway, you feel like hitting up a pub? Might help give your girl some space. And quat. Usually Izuku would have just politely declined, but with everything going on, he wanted a drink. Why not? And quat. A look of pure victory crossed Tenzin's face and he pumped a fist in the air triumphantly. Sweet, that's the spirit, Midoriya. About time you came around and hung out with somebody. And quat. A certain happiness came over the quirkless man at seeing such a boisterous joy in someone. It was good and wholesome, which he hadn't felt in a long time. Don't get too excited there, I'm pretty boring as a person. And quat. A good-natured tap hit him on the arm as Tenzin grinned back at him. Ah, you'll be great. And quat. Taking the stairs to the lobby floor of the building, Izuku couldn't help but feel grateful for his co-worker's energy and how he tended to prattle on about things that distracted from his worries. In fact, it almost felt like he was in high school again, talking with Aki about this or that. He smiled as they exited and found himself enjoying the company, when suddenly he saw someone who made his heart drop. Standing on the edge of the property, right on the sidewalk by the road in a tan leather jacket, denim pants and white sneakers with a steaming cup of coffee in hand was Shoto Todoroki, looking right at him with the emotion of a statue. Izuku remained where he was, unsure of what to do when the hero began to walk towards him in casual, relaxed strides that contained a certain indifference. Tenzin, who was focused on Izuku, turned his eyes to the motion and was likewise floored at the appearance of such a high-ranking hero and was in shocked awe as the man who helped save the world approached. Todoroki raised an eyebrow at the reactions and focused solely on the quirkless man with a stoic familiarity. Midoriya, I was hoping you wouldn't mind coming with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss. And quat. Izuku said nothing for a moment before turning his eyes to Tenzin as if to ask for permission, which the redhead picked up instantly when Izuku spoke far too formally. It would seem I'm needed elsewhere. I hope you can forgive the mishap. And quat. The redhead flinched and took a few steps back and forced an uneasy smile. Not a problem, I'll see you later, Midoriya. And quat. He said with an awkwardness that was palpable as he walked out of sight, right as Izuku eyed the hero with a professional mask just as stoic as him. May I ask why you felt the need to arrive here, sir? And quat. Todoroki shrugged and sipped his coffee as he walked towards him. Let's call it curiosity for now. I have a day off and there's things I'd like to learn about. Would that be an issue? And quat. Izuku raised an inquisitive eyebrow at him. Such as? And quat. The dual-colored eyes of the pro narrowed to a serious degree. Things that cannot be discussed here, so if you please let's move on from here. And quat. Izuku inhaled and rolled his shoulders at the situation. Very well. And quat. Taking after the hero as he turned down the sidewalk, Izuku huffed slightly at the intrusion while suppressing a growing fear that something had gone wrong with either Himiko or Ochako or Sato or even Katsuki. Yet the man's stride was too composed, too lacking in haste or concern for a truly serious agenda, or perhaps he was permanently this reserved, which would admittedly be concerning. Heading east for 10 minutes, Izuku managed to build up the courage to speak, unsure of what any of this could mean. So, what exactly is going on? And quat. Todoroki shrugged as he passively gazed ahead. There's a class reunion happening this weekend and I want you to go with me. I figured we could get better acquaintance since it's likely we'll be seeing each other a lot more, given how deeply rooted you are with my charge. And quat. The green-haired man mentally paused at that like he was suddenly hit over the head before wanting to groan. Why the fuck does this keep happening? What the hell was so interesting about him? At least this time it waited until his workday was over. Shaking his head, Izuku eyed the crime fighter. I appreciate that, though I think a simple text message would have been fine as well. And quat. Todoroki shrugged again. I was bored and you likely didn't have much to do. Besides, it gets me out of the house for a bit and my wife's been bugging me about it. Raising a newborn isn't exactly a loose responsibility even when she keeps loading the work on herself. And quat. Izuku halted at the words, not sure how to approach the topic with all the previous ideas in his head bouncing around. In a strange way he even felt envious of the guy despite logically knowing it was stupid. I see, can I ask what it's like? Parenthood, I mean. And quat. Todoroki turned his head and studied him as if something absurd had happened, looking on with critical, judging eyes before sighing. It's complicated. I have more than enough wealth to shirk off the usual worries of people. I don't even need to work to survive with the money our families have, so it's far less stressful than most would have it. Really, raising the baby is our only concern and we both love it, but there's always the fear, for me at least, that I'll do something wrong and fail as a parent. And quat. The elemental user gave an icy stare at the sidekick as a morbid curiosity blazed in his eyes. That being said, however, are you actually considering having a child with her even after learning what she's like? ? And quat. Izuku gave a shrug in return as if it was a basic and irrefutable truth. Yes, I am. Is that an issue ? And quat. Todoroki continued to stare at him as if discovering something disgusting yet fascinating with the man. Legally speaking, no. There's no law inhibiting anyone from having children. Having custody over them is another matter, however. The state can't say whether or not anyone can give birth or conceive a child, since that would be a violation of their rights, but for the sake of the child, the state and the commission can and will step in to make sure such a place is safe for them to be raised in. And quat. He continued with a slight revulsion in his voice. Given your partner's past record and her proclivities towards violence, it's very likely the baby would be given over to foster care immediately. And quat. A low pain came over Izuku that showed barely on his face as his voice cracked with a deeply restrained sorrow at what was, perhaps, a shattered dream. So you mean, Himiko and I can never have a family ? And quat. Todoroki sighed with a shake of his head. I'm not saying it's impossible, just very unlikely. However, given the fact that she's legally free and a model reformer, there might be some leniency. You'd both have to make a case in a private court, but there are avenues if that's worth it to you. And quat. It was better than nothing, and so Izuku breathed a tad easier while weighing his words. It certainly is. She means everything to me. And quat. Todoroki came to a stop with a hidden bafflement in his stone-like expression that gauged the less gifted man. What exactly is so damn great about her that you'd suffer so much willingly? Much less bind yourself permanently to her? I understand she was there for you, but Midoriya, you have to understand what kind of life that's like. You'll be scorned by everyone and the commission will constantly be monitoring you, and even then, she's done unforgivable things to people. I want to see her succeed and prove that there's hope for anyone, but she isn't normal. And quat. Izuku glared at his fellow until he dropped it and pursed his lips awkwardly, sounding more than a little self-conscious. I know. Fuck, I've even experienced it myself. She's unorthodox and dangerous, especially given what she did in the past, but she's all I want. Like, I know she was a demon and that she's sadistic in a sexual way, yet no matter how hard I try, I physically can't see a life without her. Yes, she was that person, but she's also the woman who comforted me and loved me at my worst, who picked me up from the bottom and pushed me to improve. She's one of the only people I have in this world, and she makes it worth it, all of it. And quat. He cracked his knuckles in contemplation as he continued. I have literally nothing, no value as a human being. No quirk, no hard-earned fortune or genius intellect or famous parents or wise mentor. I'm just a drone and a great machine that grinds people up to dust with nothing to show for it aside from an unremarkable job. Except for her, she's a monster, sure, but there's also strength of will, wisdom well beyond her years, insurmountable courage, a wonderful intellect and a powerful nurturing kindness for all her sadism. All that which I lack, she was born with, and I have her. A little, unremarkable drone. And quat. Izuku went on as he began to vent with his mind weighing on him. I love her so damn much, and it feels like I never do enough, that I don't give enough of myself even when I grant my blood. I want her, Todoroki. More than anything else, I want to be the one to make her happy and see her smile only at me with those wonderful fangs. My only desire is for her to be mine, and I don't know why. I fight it with all the knowledge I have on her and how that could affect us both. But I want to claim her, I want to own her, and for her to own me. I want to give everything I am before anything happens. And quat. A brow was raised by the warrior at the talk. I take it you've lost someone before? And quat. Again Izuku glared as old pain came back in full to his heart, only to almost look at him with a sort of gratitude. Yeah, I did. I had an opportunity to get everything I ever wanted and I hesitated because of a stupid reason. I said I only needed one more day, to wait until tomorrow so that I could make everything just right. Then the calamity happened and everything got ruined. And quat. A softer quality entered Todoroki's voice, one of almost understanding mixed with intrigue. You mind me asking what made you hesitate? And quat. Another pause came from Izuku as he recalled the pleasing pressure of being held down by all that weight on his lap, the look in those sapphire eyes gleaming down with such adoration and want, along with the way his heart beat out of his chest and how he felt bewildered and excited with his own devotion booming in his soul, right as his pride and fear snuck in and made him make the biggest mistake of his life. I was scared of my emotions. I didn't want to act from the heart in the heat of the moment because I was worried about making a mistake and I wanted to be in control of it. I wanted a level head and a plan instead of an illogical push because I didn't trust myself. Which is bullshit since it was what I always wanted from day one, but I was a coward who wanted to think and calculate, which ended up ruining my life. And quat. The sourness of the statement stung the air and the son of fire nodded with a lopsided understanding. That's rough. I get it though. When I first met my wife I was absolutely floored by how she acted. She was logical, but she always wanted to take risks, to be emotional, and I kind of got dragged along into her life. Most of the time she was always the one making the plans, the dates, She was always the spontaneous one, and honestly if it wasn't for that, I'd be too paralyzed and thought to be where I am. And quad. Izuku laughed at that, feeling oddly nostalgic for what he described. Let me guess, she also pestered you into joining clubs and doing more than the bare minimum? And quad. Todoroki shared a laugh as old memories came back. Yeah, she introduced me to jazz and shot put and painting and more foreign food than I can count. She was a dynamo, that's for sure. And quad. Izuku shook his head at that with a grin as he shot back. When you guys got engaged she was the one to suggest it, wasn't she? And quad. The elemental user shrugged. Suggest is too weak a word, try handing me the ring and then refusing to move until I get on one knee. And quad. Izuku smiled even more so as his best days came back. And the second you even humored her she was all over you, blowing your phone with texts and coming over to your house like she lived there? And quad. A similar mood came over the hero when he answered. Oh, you have no idea. She wanted to meet my mother who happened to be in intensive mental care for some stuff, and then she bought my brother and sister gifts aplenty, even took them abroad for a getaway. It was sweet. And quad. He turned his gaze back at the sidekick with the nostalgia fading away into curiosity. If I can ask, what exactly did you do after you lost her? And quad. Izuku shrugged as he swallowed the burns of his emotional scars. Really, I was numb to the world. I never tried to reach out once life got back to normal, and I stayed that way for years. My mom had more influence over my life than me since I was just so damn tired all the time. I know she's still alive at least, but it's been years so she's likely moved on, and that was one of the things tipped me over the edge. Everything bad compounded over time, and back then when I managed to escape Katsuki in my teens, she was around to take my mind off it, but now she wasn't and I was alone with my thoughts. And quad. Izuku drifted his sight to his fellow, feeling strangely glad for the conversation. I was always haunted by all the things I fucked up and what I never did, I still am. Yet when you get older day by day and everything gets so unbearable that you need to force yourself out of bed all so you can afford to come home to an empty apartment that's bleeding you dry, you start to stop caring. Ironically, if I was most people, I probably would have turned to villainy just to not feel so shitty, but I didn't want to be remembered that way, so I chose to jump instead. And quad. To his surprise the hero didn't sound judgmental at all. In fact, he may have been trying to pull a joke. Why didn't you try to invest in a hobby? You strike me as a really good food reviewer. And quad. The green-haired man squinted at him. Of all the things too, whatever, is there anything else you need? Because I'd like to head home. And quad. Todoroki mused on the words and answered as he emptied his coffee cup with a far more serious look about him. Do you feel safe with Himiko? Has she ever made you feel like you were in danger? And quad. Izuku flinched at the suggestion with more than a little indignation. Of course I feel safe around her. Sure, she can be a bit violent at times, but I always consent to it. And quad. Todoroki took a moment as the sharpness of his eyes dulled. Alright, I just wanted to ask. So, what exactly do you have planned going forward until Friday? And quad. I left Izuku as he lowered his gaze a bit. Nothing much, just working and seeing Himiko. And quad. Todoroki hummed at the answer and flexed his fingers habitually, seeming in light thought before speaking. So about that, would you mind maybe helping check in on Bakugo before the reunion this week? I know you don't exactly like the guy, but stuff like this makes him more than a little crazy and he seems to actually listen to you. And quad. Izuku gave another passive shrug as he pictured it. Sure, so long as he doesn't run his mouth like last time I'd be fine with checking on him. Matter of fact, you feel like going to an amusement park with us? He's been bugging me about it for months, and with somebody else around I figured it would be a lot more bearable. And quad. The fire and ice summoner thought on it and stoically shrugged. It sounds good, but I have responsibilities to my family, and me being gone for that long when my son is still so little wouldn't set right with me. Dropping by for a few hours to give him some company is one thing, but that's too much of a time commitment. And quad. Izuku once again accepted this. That's fair enough, family comes first after all. I just didn't want to keep saying no until he blows up, and in all fairness he isn't being that much of a dick. I just don't want to babysit a walking disaster zone with a temper. Anyway, if I can ask, what exactly do you think of him anyway? I know a lot of people don't particularly like him, but I'm curious how he treated you since you were always gifted. And quad. A tenseness came to Todoroki's body, causing his back to broaden and his muscles to tighten as he heard that. Bakugo was complicated. Even from the very everyone could see he wasn't all there, but he was still a bully, or rather tried to be. Only it was hard to be intimidating when you keep making an ass of yourself and pissing everybody off. Hell, he picked on the shortest guy in our class for a couple months before the guy snapped and glued Boom Boy to the floor and wall and beat him until 5 of us had to pull him off. He was just always looking for fear in other people, to put extras in their place as he put it, and he tried that shit on me. Only he didn't get shit since I live by the saying you can't get blood from a stone and opos. Eventually he softened up to me, but that was because the only person willing to be his friend made him try. And quad. The crime fighter continued. After the war, Bakugo was a complete wreck. Beforehand he was paranoid since the League kept mentally tormenting him. All the way up to kidnapping him from his home in the middle of the night and killing his father in retribution for rejecting their offer to join. When it was over he kind of self-destructed. Honestly he would have stepped down I think, if it wasn't for Mirio, Lemillion turning his cape in. Now with all the horrible stuff, I don't think he's doing okay and I'm fairly certain you're the main reason he hasn't gone utterly nuts. And quat. The quirkless man paused and thought about the statement. Why the hell, never mind, whatever the case, he's still around and I gotta deal with it. Right now my only concern is getting home. And quat. The heir to the flame and ice jabbed a finger to the left where a restaurant with a chicken as its logo was and spoke up. Feel like getting something to eat before that ? And quat. Izuku stared at the window and decided he did in fact feel like it. Sure. And quat. The only thing on his mind as he went about it was the hope that he'd be able to handle things, but for Himiko he was certain he would. Himiko felt numb, like all her emotions had short-circuited all at once and she was left as this worn out husk of a person while she continued to stare up at the blank spot between the pictures on the wall. She had sat herself on the sofa perhaps an hour ago and she hadn't moved. It seemed unnecessary in the grand scheme compared to what she was dealing with. How the fuck did this happen? Of all the things to occur in her life, especially now considering Izuku, she never thought he'd learn about who she was and just shrug and kiss her. That fucker literally shrugged, kissed her and groped her like everything was normal after learning she was that villain. Sure he looked a tad uncomfortable afterwards, but he still smiled and held her. He even carried her to the bed like usual and suckled on her neck. The sheer chance of that happening was low to say the least. She honestly expected him to try and kill her if he found out her past, but she was wrong and now she had no idea what to do. She thought maybe the relationship would last another 5 months, maybe a year if she was lucky and didn't let any more shit slip about her past. However fucking Zuzu proved her dead wrong and stayed, so what the hell did that mean? Did she actually have a future, possibly a lifelong one, with him? Sure he's talked about marriage and kids, but that was when times were good and words were cheap, but since he's actually staying, is that going to happen? Is Izuku going to force her into marriage one day? Himiko didn't dislike the concept, but she knew him well enough that he'd literally force her onto the altar if he was staying. He pushed against her boundaries and nearly took her chastity so many times and it was the way he looked at her that made her feel it in a way she couldn't describe. It was wonderful and suffocating. A hunger that was more than lust which she knew if fed a little, it would eat her whole and part of her worshipped that. He wanted to eat her, to consume everything about her and join in union until she was defiled and stained by his spirit. Izuku would take her down and drag her into the future no matter what because she was what he wanted. Not fame or money or power. Her. An insane villainess with no prospects, a blood fetish and an anger issue and he wanted her so damn badly. It made her feel special and loved and gooey that her cheeks gave an honest blush. Shit, there was a likely chance that she was going to get married and actually move on from her past. She didn't know what to think about that. Shifting her eyes to the photos, she studied them and sighed as if they could hear her and respond. What would you guys say if you saw me now? The crazy girl finally found someone just as nuts and might be getting engaged one day. And quat. She shook her head at the thoughts coming from above. I don't know what the future's going to look like, but Izuku's here with me and I think I'm actually happy. More so actually. I wish you guys were still around. Maybe you could have met Zuzu. I think you would have caught on like nothing else, assuming he didn't just try to steal me away because it's too dangerous. Big baby that he is. And quat. She smiled at that. I'm scared you know? I'm scared of fucking this up, but I'm also scared of this succeeding and I get my happy ending with him. I want it, but I almost never get what I want, so what the hell, you know? I genuinely love him, in the normal way and my way and he's been nothing but perfect. And quat. She inhaled. I've cut him and he willingly gave himself to me. He even lets me drink his blood and despite all that he wants nothing more than to plow me. Gross I know, but I'm fairly certain he wants to knock me up, which is odd, given he knows what I'm like and what I did back then. Funny how it works out where I get the loving, disgusting boyfriend who's nuts about me only after everything fails. And quat. Her smile faded as she remembered her old insanity and what once was. You know, if my parents had just given a shit and fed me animal blood instead of beating me, I probably would have been fine. Sure I'd still be degenerate and sadistic, but so was Midnight and people loved her. Granted I hold myself higher than that whore ever did. Maybe I could have met him sooner if I behaved? Maybe we could have been engaged in high school and he'd be my manager while I was a play actress. And quat. She glowered in her gloom. I could have had a whole different life if it wasn't for that one thing. We all could have and I was the only one who got lucky enough to get what I wanted in the first place. Maybe if we had gotten help or maybe if we just killed Bakugo when we had the chance, then our dreams could have come true. Except, I guess mine has. I finally have what I want and right now I wish you all were here so I could share this. And quat. A laugh left her lips as she stared wistfully at the pictures. Maybe we could have had that better world Spinner was always on about and gotten to actually fix things, but we never really had a plan, did we? It was always the short-term stuff and those quick thrills with the vague idea of a goal. Really the only thing we did right was icing the doctor and the old man. And the weird thing was, I wasn't happy like I am now. Sure, I loved the thrill of stuff, but it felt so temporary, like it was all going to end in a second. And quad. She went on with distant eyes. I remember waking up every day wondering if it was the last day I had on Earth or if there was some hero that would finally catch me or if you'd all leave me. I enjoyed the pleasure of how we lived and getting to be that monster, but it was always one heartbreak after another until I just gave up. Hell, you guys were my only reason to keep going sometimes because I was so done with being alone, having nobody like a damn ghost. And quad. A sigh left her as the memory of hands on her hips and blood in her mouth came forward, weakening her mood. Now I have someone who loves me for me, who accepts who and what I am. He's never once flinched from me, never ran or used me even when I act like I used to. I think he even likes it now and, for fucking once it feels permanent, like goddamn steel and I love it. I love this certainty and all the warm and nasty feelings he brings. And quad. She smiled again as she remembered how weird it felt to have her second skin bitten off. He even likes eating the goop my quirk makes so he fits right in with me. It's just, he shows up every day and he's all over me. There's sometimes he won't let go and drags me around or carries me. Then there's the weird obsession he has with me of all people. He's had chances to go to other women who are way easier than me and he's never once had the idea of leaving even knowing the shit I do. All the time he only wants me despite all my problems. And quad. There wasn't really much to understand the sheer amount of relief and fear she felt, but in the moment she was happy in that strange, unknown way she hadn't had in ever. She didn't know what to do or how to act or what to say, but this was the first time something seemed to stick, and so long as she didn't fuck this up, it should stay the way it is. Which is admittedly more than she deserved. However, she learned long ago to take the good with the bad, and by God was this good. Looking away from the pictures and standing from the sofa, she began to shuffle to the kitchen and turn on the sink, cleaning the plates in an effort to keep herself busy. So much laid ahead, so perhaps, for once, she could relax? Yet try as she might, Himiko found it impossible, to the point she was swaying on her toes. She wanted to do something for him. He deserved that much, but what did he really want from her? It was clear he wasn't around just because she was a virgin, nor was getting laid his only goal. Otherwise he'd jump on Cheeky's offer. She didn't have riches to inherit or fame. Well, she had infamy, but he wasn't like Curious was. All he really seemed to desire was her, simply because. He had no rhyme or reason as to why he stayed. Most would have fled long ago and he had options, but it was always her, no matter what. Cheeky had more money, more status, bigger tits, and wasn't dangerously kinky, and despite that he still refused it. The same could have been said of Acid Girl or any of the heroic bimbos he was around. Fuck it likely could have been better for him than her, and Izuku stuck by her regardless of anything. She could be herself around him and he could be as he was. So maybe that was his reason, or maybe she had gotten insanely lucky. Instantly Himiko considered baking him a cake like she had done for Tomura and Jin and Toya and everybody else back in the day, but that seemed a little weird. Like, how the hell does that seem appropriate? Hey Zuzu, I know you just found out I was one of the worst villains of this generation and almost took over the world and ruined everything. But since you decided to stay with my blood drinking, murdering self, here's a cake. Oh, by the way, could I cut you again and maybe suck your dick? Pretty please? And quad. No, it didn't. In fact, it seemed more than a little desperate, which she was. Really, if he's willing to stay, then she had to do something to show how much that meant to her. But could that be translated? Fuck, did she even know how much it meant to herself? To have someone willingly be a part of her life after seeing what she was, what she could be again. The only thing she could think of was to spread her legs, but it seemed so mundane. Yes, her maidenhood meant a great deal of dignity to her, but it wasn't like they would never have sex again afterwards. If anything, it'll be a daily thing, and it was too normal to convey what she wanted. Himiko paused and glared at the ceiling. If only she could grab a star and give it to him, then maybe it would show 2/10 of how much it soothed her soul. She let out a sigh at her own limitations. If Tomura was still around, she'd probably bug him to give Zuzu that American bitch's quirk. Now that would be something worth what she felt towards him. Yet for now, kisses will have to do. Then, as if to spite her, there came a knock on the door, his 3-tap knock. Himiko froze right when she was drying her hands as apprehension filled her. Momentarily she stared at the door like she was about to be raided, but pushed the fear away and walked towards it. Reaching under the table by the door, she took out her tanto knife, feeling as anxious as if it was her first day out of Tartarus again. With an unsteady hand she undid the locks and opened the door, revealing Izuku in his bland work clothes, looking back with an uneasy smile as he studied her. He was well shaven and lovely, with a strange smell of coffee on his skin, but his posture was relaxed if a little awkward, and he was without fear. Himiko looked up at him with her knife loosening in her hand from the anxiety, but she still managed to return the smile. Silence ruled between them for a second until Izuku broke it. Hey, sorry I took a bit getting here. I got sidetracked once work let out. And quad. She raised her hands up in surrender, doing everything she could to make the air less uncomfortable. That's no problem. Everything okay and quat. He shrugged. Yeah, just a fairly average day. And quat. Himiko stepped out of the way as he entered her apartment, shutting the door behind him and continued to stare at her with slightly troubled eyes before extending his arms. He embraced her, but it lacked the usual strength of it, instead feeling hesitant, like he didn't know what was right. Seconds later he let go and drifted his eyes to the side. I missed you while I was away. And quat. She let out an uneasy smile at that, putting her fighting knife back into its place and trying not to be weird. I missed you too, so is there anything I can do? And quat. Izuku pursed his lips as if that wasn't what he wanted to hear, then turned his head to the sofa, then to the pictures hanging over the television. He monitored them for a few seconds, then turned back to her. Wanna watch a movie? And quat. She mimicked his actions and felt his emotions mirrored inside her. If that's what you want. Lord of the Rings? And quat. He paused and flexed his fingers until they popped in the knuckles. His voice was filled with reluctance, to the point she knew he was pushing the words out, but he said it all the same. That sounds like a good idea. But Himiko. Inhale, do you mind if we talk about that stuff? And quat. She halted and recoiled ever so slightly with shame. I'm not against it, but I try not to think about it. And quat. Again he paused and cut his own words. Should we talk about it? And quat. She shrugged awkwardly. Do you want to talk about it? And quat. He rubbed his arms in worry. Not really, but we've got to address it sometime. And quat. Himiko looked to the floor. We could talk about it later. I'm more interested in what you want right now. And quat. The quirkless man sighed at himself and spoke with reluctance. Can you get the comforter out of your room and lay down on the couch, and maybe take your shirt off? And quat. She nodded with a grin, feeling that was well within her power. Sure Zuzu, I can do that. And quat. Turning to her bedroom, the slasher never got the chance to move since arms wrapped around her and she had to fight her reflex to strike and let Izuku flip her around. His lips touched hers and stayed there for a few wonderful seconds until he let go. Then he went back to the entrance, leaving her to her devices. Himiko strolled with a warmth in her chest at being subject to his wants, to know he still loved her. Peering at her bed, she scooped up the blanket and went back to the living room where Izuku had put his shoes away and removed his shirt, revealing the bumpy, scarred visage of his body. Without any shame to her, the blonde threw the comforter on the sofa and removed her top and bra, exposing herself to him. There came this wonderful boom in his eyes upon seeing her breasts, filling with a want so strong she could smell it, yet restrained enough that he didn't push. Quickly she sat herself down on the couch, feeling the fabric on her skin right as Izuku moved to join her. Instantly she felt his hands caress her and his lips dance along her neck as he merged under the blanket and threw himself at hers along with the feel of his chest on her back. Yet he made no moves to remove her pants and instead rubbed his body against her, pressing his weight and embracing her until they both found the best position and remained there with hands digging into each other. Again he kissed her and caressed her chin, sounding absolutely sincere. You have no idea how badly I missed you today, you really don't. And quat. She smirked and ran her fingers through his hair as she thrived by his touch. Well, don't get ahead of yourself, mister. It isn't like I'm going anywhere. And quat. He smiled with more than a little desire as he held her. I know, but it's never a bad thing to be honest. And quat. Her smirk grew as she gently poked him in the chest. Oh yeah? Well, what else do you want to be honest about? And quat. He laughed and kissed and suckled at her neck, enlisting a laugh from her as she vainly tried to push him away until he came loose with a loud pop. That I'm madly, hopelessly in love with you and that you fascinate me like nobody else. And quat. He paused as he cuddled a little closer. That and you're wonderful despite all the bloody stuff. And quat. Himiko laughed at that as she ran her hands over his back, feeling a bit of heat at the connection that made her cheeks get rose-caked. We both know that isn't true. The real wonderful person here is cheeky since she let me be able to be here with you to start with. And quat. He rolled his eyes as he fondled a breast. Maybe, but she certainly doesn't have anything on you. And quat. The slasher laughed again, feeling a familiar one inside her. If you say so, Zuzu. Can I ask you a favor? And quat. He grinned with enthusiasm. Of course. And quat. More pink colored her cheeks as those forbidden images left her mind and made her hungry and wanting. Can I cut you for a bit? And quat. Izuku's enthusiasm died instantly, yet instead of fear or apprehension coming like it would to most people, he only appeared annoyed. He didn't move from her nor let go and simply stared with agated eyes as he caressed her warm cheeks. Himiko, I am not laying down like that again. If you want to slice me a little, fine, but you gotta let me move and for that matter. And quat. The annoyance multiplied as he moved away from his lover and the sofa to pace around the living room with his hands on his jaw until he finally said the words he wanted to say for so long. I want your virginity. Now, I love you, I wouldn't be here if I didn't, but I've accepted a lot from you that 99% of people would run from. If you want to cut me, so long as it's in reason, fine. But I want something more. I mean, we've done more outrageous stuff and I haven't been with you once. And quat. He shook his head and spoke in a far more somber tone. Look, I understand that you kept me at an arm's length with this because I didn't know, but now that I do, can we just drop the pretense? I know who you are and I just want to love you, so let me do that. And quote. Himiko felt some of the heat inside her chest as her anxiety came back, yet it couldn't defeat the encroaching smile that was slowly taking form. She was excited like she hadn't been in a long time, and the fact she had a wonderful, beautiful participant who was willing and loved her, it was divine. The way his face wrinkled in annoyance at her request while her mind boomed with gory, sexy images rather than disgust warmed her heart, and the fact the only thing he wanted in return was to deflower her, to love her more, made it all the better. She had half a mind to simply grab a knife and spread herself like a harlot for him as she started slicing. She wanted it so badly, but there was still the question of how much he knew about what she did in her free time back then. Reeling herself back slightly while not repressing the want, she spoke with those warm, blushing cheeks that marked someone out for death so many times before in her youth. I don't mind that, Zuzu, but how much about me did you read? And quote. Apparently he had had enough and slapped his hands to his sides while staring at her in utter disbelief. Are you being serious right now? I've told you all that. I just found out some stuff that should have me running for the hills. Frankly, I found out that kind of stuff from day one, and you told me as much with a knife to my neck. You know what I mean, and I'm still here, and I want to be here because I love you more than anything. You've literally cut me for a thrill, explained in graphic detail how you killed not one person, but 20 and drink blood as a treat. And quote. He kept going as the last of his long patience had finally worn thin. You were literally responsible for the calamity, and I'd lie to protect you. I've chosen you over my own mother to the point I haven't spoken to her in almost a year. I have done all this and am willing to do more because of how much you mean to me, but what do I need to do so that you'll let me be with you? What more can you feel uncertain of after all that? And quote. She recoiled ever so slightly at his outburst and felt more than a little guilty. He had put up with a lot from her and been nothing but loving. Yet she still worried about that one thing, that one habit even the League was disgusted by when she was caught in the midst of her passion. And quote. Now was the closest she'd ever gotten to complete acceptance, and if it wasn't for that one horde of ghosts that hung over her like a noose, she'd have thrown herself at him. Despite all that, she still felt gooey and sharp as that heat boiled inside her and her brain relaxed itself. She was still aroused at what was coming, and she honestly had the thought of taking him regardless of his consent. But she knew that was wrong, so she stood up and walked over to him with a barely withheld smile fueled by depravity. She kissed him for a brief second and whispered with a teasing voice that she loved making. Why though? Don't I make you happy? I mean, you get your jollies and I get mine. In the end, I'm the one making you explode, and let's just say you make me implode. So is there any real issue? And quote. He scowled, but ran his hands on her hips and worked to get her pants off. It isn't even. You get to enjoy the cutting more, and I'm just there taking it until you open your mouth. I'm not saying you owe me, even if it sounds like it. I want to enjoy it with you. Like, the first time we did this sort of thing. The one where you wore that nice lingerie and we actually got to do stuff afterwards. We both enjoyed it. Now it's more lopsided. I know it's petty, but I want to touch you a lot more. And quote. She smiled and caressed his cheek with her knuckles, blushing all the while. Alright, mister, we can do that, but you can't use this just yet. I want to plan it out. Make it special as it were. And quote. She tapped on the rim of her vagina and grinned. He huffed and took off his pants in turn, more than ready to go when he paused and grabbed her by the shoulders and kissed her, rubbing his shaft against her entrance as he did so until he pulled away. There was a reflective quality to his eyes that let her see the debauchery nesting in her through him, and this fucker looked absolutely enthralled as he cradled her chin. You know I'm gonna fuck you until my legs give out one of these days, right? And quote. She smiled, knowing damn well what they had in store for each other. We'll see, Zuzu. For now just sit down and wait, okay? And quote. He hesitated as he placed a hand around her rear and squeezed for a moment, then reluctantly let go. Fine, but please don't keep me waiting like you did last time. And quote. She waved a dismissive hand as she went to her room and shut the door behind her. I wouldn't dream of it. And quote. Himiko made her way to the nightstand with such glee in her heart. She felt her chest heave and the blood pump in her veins. She felt drunk and happy, yet so damn alert. Like everything was peeling away except what she had in mind. Suddenly she found herself frothing at the idea of a plan, of a routine, and the excitement that brought. Part of her wished Izuku was more than a little unaware of what she had in store. Not to a non-consenting degree like her old crushes, but enough that it surprised him. Thinking about the shock and the little twists of pain his face gave when she cut him or bit him, only to have it clear into an O face at the end, was heavenly. She knew it wasn't her quirk talking, otherwise she'd have planned far more heinous things that went beyond mere bloodletting, which relaxed her as she thrilled in the feeling. Yet as she stood there with the knife from the nightstand, she also wanted to spoil the fucker. He was nothing but a good boy, and frankly it was boring to just do the same act over and over. Actual sex needed more consideration. Definitely not tonight, but maybe she could put something on. He said he liked the lingerie, maybe that. Then again, did she want blood on it? Thinking about it, there were only so many things she could do that might make him happy. However, she really did want him. Sighing as she readied her blade with disinfectants and checked the 2 spare first aid kits, Himiko enjoyed the fantasy in her head of how badly he would absolutely ruin her while she made him into a pin cushion. Briefly she considered suggesting sewing needles getting brought in, but realized that was a bit much. Besides, that was what her fangs were for. With her tools in hand, Himiko exited to the living room where she saw her baby waiting nervously on the sofa, and she loved it. His eyes went wide at the appearance of the knife, and she saw his muscles tense as in remembrance, and yet his dick was still hard. Granted, not as hard when they were just fooling around, but it was the effort that counted. She grinned as her lips peeled back, and Izuku managed to relax himself as she sat next to him on the sofa. Without a word, she put the kit and blade on the coffee table and kissed him, finding a nice buzz at his touch. His hands reached out and caressed her sides, lingering at her hips before he separated and stared at her with a mix of love, lust, fear and excitement. "You want me to go into the bedroom?" ? Inquired. It sounded casual, but she knew he was holding back, which elicited a hot smile from her. "Nope, just stay here for a minute. We'll get things going in a bit. For now, repeat after me, pineapple. Inquired. Izuku inhaled and repeated, pineapple. Inquired. She did likewise. Inquired. Pineapple. Inquired. Again he did. Pineapple. Inquired. Himiko said it one more time. Pineapple. Inquired. Which had Izuku finished the ritual. Pineapple. Inquired. With that done, the blonde grinned at her lover and dragged a light hand over his chest as he sat in dreaded anticipation. Gently she grabbed at his back to get a firmer hold, enjoying the bumpy texture of his scars, and found just the spot in the middle of his left side. Briefly she drew her attention to his eyes and saw the precious mixture of feelings inside, which only grew when she grabbed the knife. The very tip of the blade rested on his skin, and Himiko couldn't help but grin as she spoke. "Ready, Zuzu?" Inquired. He hesitated with a visible debate in his soul, and to her slight surprise, he leaned forward and kissed her. "Go ahead." Inquired. She savored the kiss and let her impulses fly as she brought the knife forward, staining the steel an adorable red that made Izuku grunt and curse in pain. Blood wept slightly from the wound, and as she brought the flat of the tool to her tongue, it was met by a warm, copper taste that she delighted in. The pain and the discomfort resided on his face, lessening into a low annoyance that warmed her skin while she focused on the bleeding cut and felt her heart beat faster. She wanted it, but on the other side she was unsure if she should say something to him, something to reaffirm him. Yet being a bit greedy wouldn't hurt. Lowering her head, Himiko locked her lips around the gash and drank of the crimson while her tongue danced along the warm, split skin, feeling the soft edges of the cut give way to her. More of the wonderful taste of life entered her mouth in barely filling sips that felt like the best of wines. There came a touch to her hair, and instead of pushing her away like anyone else would have, Izuku rubbed her head lovingly as a silence reigned over the room. A few seconds later she pulled away with velvet staining her lips and the greatest of passions in her chest. She was hot and eager, ready to cut and bite and love while her face went positively flushed. Izuku was accepting, or rather didn't seem upset at her, and so, the blonde put the blade to a section just above the old cut, wanting to make it last as long as she could. "You set for the second one?" Inquired. At that, his eyes shined with displeasure, and he made it known when he leaned away from the blade. "Would you mind if we did something else for a bit and then came back to this?" Inquired. Himiko pouted as her excitement blazed, making her feel wild and joyful despite her lover's objections. However, she did lower the knife and listen. "Such as?" Inquired. He put his hands to the underside of her thighs, letting his fingers sink in as he raised her legs ever so slightly. "Can you lay down for me and spread them? I want to make you moan." Inquired. Scowling at having her delights halted, she begrudgingly rolled to her back and separated her legs, letting the right slink off the cushions and setting her left on the top of the sofa. It was strange being this exposed, but she liked it well enough. It was even better when she saw how Izuku's eyes popped at what she did. There came a hitch in his breath, and he inched closer to her sweet spot as he dragged his hands over her torso. He looked up at her, perhaps for approval or simply because, and kissed her while she sat there in annoyance. Slowly he then began to kiss his way down her neck, to her chest, her belly, and finally, after rubbing the girth of her thighs, lowered himself to her pussy. Himiko huffed a bit at how his tongue teased at the entrance, feeling a nice surge of pleasure as he slowly forced his way in. It coiled around as her walls squeezed it, the formless mass merely giving way and continuing to squirm. She was breathing heavier now as the taste of his blood mixed with the air as she was fighting for breath in the most amazing way. A moan left her lips, one loud and deep, like it came from somewhere she hadn't seen before, and Izuku certainly heard it. His hands reached out to fondle her breasts, to caress her skin, to do anything to touch her, and she knew it. Eventually, after a few moments, Himiko moved her legs as the urge to squeeze came with the pleasure and rested them on his back, which only made her outbursts louder and deeper as it was like her lungs were being flattened. Again and again she moaned and cursed in joy, as she dug her fingers into his green curls as he went on with even more aggression. Then suddenly, he pulled away and brought his fingers around the entrance, spreading it slightly as he studied the quivering, dripping folds inside. He met her eyes once more and instantly she knew what he wanted. There was a firmness to him now, one that did not want to be denied, and it showed in more ways than one with how aroused he looked. Himiko bit her lip at his gaze, scared to show weakness since she knew if she did, he'd go ahead with it. Yet to a degree she really did want him to. More than simple desire weighed on this as her gratitude and guilt for what he's done for her joined in and demanded she do it. If he hasn't left after learning all he has, then he won't ever leave, so she should be a good person and give her boyfriend what he wants. Her fear, however, the fear of if he knew about her greatest shame and darkest folly, played in the back of her head, overpowering the screams with a whisper. He's gonna find out what you did, how you killed them, and then he's going to flee thinking he's next. After all, isn't that what you want? All that wonderful, pretty blood? It would only take a quick slash to the neck and you'd free him from all his troubles. He'd be in heaven and all his crimson would be yours. You could become him, show how much you truly love him. It'd be exactly like Mom and Dad said, you're a demo and quat. Himiko shut the voice down instantly with a mental snarl. She hadn't done what she did to those fuckers out of more than hate, and what she had with Izuku was holy and scared. He was hers, damn it. Why the hell would she want to kill the only thing she had? Her golden man who gifted his blood so freely? Death was a waste and there was a future here, so why squander that? Why waste the endless pleasures and pains and the oceans of blood he would give her? Why get rid of the person who she could actually throw everything at? From her most needy hugs to her darkest thirsts. Besides, she could fucking ask and he'd let her become him. Shit, he'd probably eat the second skin and geek out. She tossed and grappled with the thought before blinking at how lost in her mind she was, coming back to reality where Izuku stared at her with overly aroused scented concern. You okay? You kinda blacked out there for a minute dot and quat. Himiko smiled at the sweet worry in his voice as most of her wants and needs were left in the path of what transpired in her head. Setting the knife down, she sighed and readjusted herself on the sofa, feeling far more grounded after such a horrible thing. I'm fine, Zuzu, just bad memories. And quat. She stared at his body and felt a little upset that it cost her such a good time, but hearing the voice of her doubt, hurt and insanity tended to be a turnoff for her. Actually, Izuku, do you mind if we cut this short? I'm not really feeling it anymore. And quat. He scowled and stuck 2 fingers inside her, then removed them as they were positively coated in her love. This begs to differ. Are you sure? Because I can get cut again if that's what you need. And quat. There was an aggressive, demanding tone in his voice, but he didn't push himself on her. Shaking her head, Himiko smiled warmly at him. It isn't your fault, Izuku, I just ... and quat. She didn't want to explain or simply tell him no after all he did, so she shoved him down with a push and grabbed his cock. Without waiting to explain, she stuffed it in her mouth and sucked like her life was on the line, careful not to let her fangs rest on the skin. It took a few seconds and some wagging of her tongue, but soon enough he finished. It was nasty and gross, and in a repulsive way she liked being able to please him in such a manner, although she gagged and coughed as she spat out his spunk. Izuku moaned and laid back as his energy left him, most of which was in her throat now. She heard him huff as he fought for breath and reached a hand out to touch her, which Himiko begrudgingly allowed. She leaned back and let him hold her as he began to suckle on her neck, with steel entering his arms to suffocate her in his love that she was unspeakably grateful for. Better now, Zuzu? And quat. He continued to suckle at the nape of her neck for a moment before letting go with a loud pop that she knew would leave a mark to her silent joy, and spoke with a heavy guilt in his voice. You sure I couldn't have done more for you? I'm willing to be cut for a while if you want. Like I said, I don't want this to be lopsided for either of us. And quat. The slasher shrugged and nested deeper in his arms. You're fine. If I was still needy you'd know. For now, can we just stay here for a bit? And quat. Izuku returned the shrug. Sure. And quat. There they laid for some time, with Himiko simply enjoying being embraced by such a wonderful person, feeling his chest rise and fall to her back and the warmth of his body, when she noticed him staring off at the pictures on the wall. He studied them like he was seeing the collection for the first time, and soon, his grip on her tightened protectively when he broke the quiet. Himiko, do you mind if I ask something? And quat. She contemplated the question and shrugged as she turned and leaned on his chest. Sure. And quat. He paused as he continued to look at the pictures while holding her like she was going to vanish. Discomfort filled his voice and even a quality of fear when he finally found the will to speak. Did you know the guy who was behind it? The one with the hand on his face? And quat. She noted how much he hesitated to say it and found herself at a place of genuine confusion until she recalled that Tomura, especially in the months before his death, would be a horrifying figure to most, which was at odds with how she remembered him. Yeah, I did. He was a pretty alright boss until Bakugo blew his head off. And quat. Izuku cringed at that and gave another question as his arms locked tighter. What was he like? Did he ever hurt you? And quat. A laugh left Himiko at such a silly suggestion and shook her head. Tomura? Ah, hell no. Not one of them would have done that. They were bastards, but there was honor amongst thieves. Granted, he did throw a lot of hissy fits and threatened to kill us a lot, but they were always just empty threats he lashed out with. He Didn't have anyone to teach him basic stuff when he was a kid, and he had an even more fucked childhood than me. Honestly, video games raised him more than anything. And quad. She continued almost absent-mindedly as she began to get lost in the past. Don't get me wrong, he would end people and was a villain to his core, but he had some good in him even when the one guy who he thought was on his side brainwashed him. For instance, he would have left civilians like you alone so long as you didn't end up as collateral damage, and he never hurt a kid. Believe it or not, he did have a conscience, not a very strong one, but more than most of us. That's why he wore the hands. They were the hands of his family that he kept around after he killed them by accident when his quirk emerged and he couldn't live with the guilt. And quad. From behind her, Izuku shifted with discomfort and gave another question that she could tell was more complex than it seemed. Can you explain why he was so obsessed with Katsuki? And quad. Himiko shrugged as if it was the most obvious fact. Simple, he wanted a friend. Ever since he met Bakugo at the USJ attack, Tomura was obsessed with him because he thought the fucker would understand our plight, that he could be shown why we do what we so and agree. Granted, Man was really conflicted about his feelings, which is why he put a severed head in the bastard's desk. It was supposed to be a quest marker or to make him remember him, real twisted stuff. However, since Boom Boy rejected our offer and got away, Tomura took that really personally. Like to a level most of us weren't okay with. And quad. She fiddled with the fingers on her belly as she explained. He started to make plans to get him back once got back on our feet after Camino and wanted to do everything from fucking with his memories to killing his mom. Now, he did manage to sneak into the guy's home and off his dad, but our portal guy figured it out and warped him back before he could finish her. Most he got from her was, I think, 3 fingers and an eye. Now you'd think that is where most would give up, but not Tomura. Hell, he actually gave Bakugo the offer one last time before shit kicked off, but Boom Boy just blasted him in the face. And quad. Himiko continued as she danced her fingers along her lover's skin. Thankfully old Dusty had his quirk and just regenerated that back, but instead of just waving his pinky finger and splattering the asshole on the walls of his classroom, he didn't. Instead he just frowned, walked back and left to go take care of his adoptive dad in Tartarus. I think Tomura never gave up that hope that Bakugo could join even until the end, and frankly I wish we'd just finished him when he first showed up, then maybe we could have won. And quad. A more inquisitive yet tense tone entered his voice. And what would that have looked like? A world where your side won? And quad. She mused on it and shrugged, completely done with old history. Honestly, we had no clue. We never really had a plan other than getting rid of the shit in our way and then worrying about it. It was never more than a one day at a time thing. Though I think it would have been better for people like you and me who were getting shafted by the system. And quad. He rolled his eyes and ran his fingers over her cheek. Sure, because a guy who puts heads in desks and wears the hands of his dead relatives would be a fantastic statesman and not a horrific tyrant with the powers of a literal god. And quad. Himiko glared at him. He wasn't that bad. Sure, he was nuts, maybe even evil, but he had some good in him. Yeah, he was petty and spiteful to the whole damn world, but he wanted us to have happy lives in it, and he did care about us, even if he had a hard time showing it. And quad. Now he glared at her. The guy destroyed an entire town, let every prisoner in the nation out, killed tens of thousands by himself and nearly took over the world. I doubt he could care much for his common man. Maybe for his underlings, but not for society or the people in it. And quad. Again Himiko glowered at him, but inhaled and let it go. No sense in arguing over the dead. He fucking tried at least. That's more than most people do. And quad. The statement was final and it seemed Izuku noted that and accepted the end of the talk easily as he went back to hugging her. Though over time, perhaps an hour or two, Himiko found her mind working and thought out loud to her darling. You know, I think if you two had met, Tomura would have really liked you, Zuzu. He'd understand why you're so pissed and might have even worked with you. And quad. He visibly cringed in disgust at the concept. Well, I certainly wouldn't, I'll tell you that right now. And quad. The blonde listened and couldn't help but question how exactly those two would interact. For some reason she saw them getting along after a while, and despite it all, she wondered if Izuku would have helped him the same way Ochako helped her. Maybe if it was Zuzu instead of Bakugo Tomura reached out too, then perhaps he'd still be alive and even have a friend. However, that would never be known, and as much as it hurt to let her friend pass from her mind, she had to focus on reality. So she grabbed Izuku's arm and enjoyed the closeness, almost certain that, perhaps, she had found her dream. Izuku stood beside Todoroki, wishing that something would happen so he could go home. It was 5 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and the guy had him follow him to Toshi's, which was a journey in itself. Then to make it worse, they both had to wait for Kachan to get here, so needless to say he was a bit miffed. Sure, it wasn't the worst waste of his time, but he'd rather be back at Himiko's and canoodling her until she falls asleep. Then again, he wondered when the last time he had been by himself was. He hadn't even stepped in his apartment in 4 weeks now that he considered it. Shit, had anyone broken in while he was gone? Did he violate the lease by leaving it vacant for that long? Was his yearbook still in there? He cursed himself for worrying and forced himself to relax with a huff. He had enough bullshit to concern himself with, so there was no point in focusing on hypotheticals. Though he had that strange mix of built-in dread and boredom, there wasn't much to do, and Todoroki hadn't said a word once since they arrived, likely due to dreading this just as much. It wasn't like Katsuki was an overtly bad guy and he wouldn't attack them, but goddamn was he a pain to be around. Even when he's trying to be nice, it's still like handling an overgrown teenager with bombs for hands. Izuku knew this even in his youth, and Todoroki had to understand, yet despite it, he was starting to miss the guy. Not in an overly fond way, but just more of wanting to know he's okay. Kicking at the dust, Izuku scanned the area and made eye contact with Todoroki, who was doing the same. Any idea what's taking him this long? And quat. The elemental user shrugged as he studied the door. No idea, usually he's punctual. And quat. Izuku mimicked him and leaned back. Let's give him another half hour. If he doesn't show up by then, I'll just call him up. And quat. Todoroki hummed at that. Fine, isn't like I have much to do anyway. And quat. He fiddled around with his fingers, tapping until he began to make ice come from one of his palms, which aroused Izuku's curiosity as he gave a question to kill more time. So with your ice, do you freeze the moisture in the air around you, or do you excrete the moisture in your body through your hand and then it gets frozen as it passes your skin? And quat. Todoroki blinked like something ungodly profound was uttered, and he turned to the quirkless man in shock. How did you know that? And quat. Izuku shrugged, not sure what the big deal was. Elemental type quirks are pretty common and most follow the same idea biologically speaking. I've never seen you fight, but it's safe to say your quirk factor is located in your hands and that you're able to conduct the ability through the air to a certain degree, which is why you need to even use your hands at all. Granted, if you could mentally use it with, say, your eyes, then you'll likely be much more adaptable. As for your fire, I'll assume it's the exact same principle, only with combustion of oxygen instead of freezing moisture. And quat. Again Todoroki blinked and stared at him like he had spoken in Russian. You found that out by only seeing me use my quirk twice? And quat. A crack of knuckles made Izuku relax slightly despite his companion's expression. Yeah, I've always been obsessed with quirks, and most tend to follow certain laws or rules or patterns. For instance, any person with a fire-based quirk has to rely on a flammable source to ignite, be that an outside factor or an internal one. Or if you want to talk about more specialized quirks in a different category, it's easy to tell that Himiko's quirk factor is located in or around her digestive system and that it can scan and mimic DNA. Or, say Katsuki's quirk, it follows the same principle as your flames with a simple ignition method crafted by the quirk factor in his hands. However, due to his sweat being transformed from water to nitroglycerin once it passes the final layer of his skin, which can be combusted from the heat in his palms. And quat. The rant ceased as Izuku realized what he did and shrank back in embarrassment. Sorry about that, I tend to go on for a while about quirks. And quat. Todoroki shook his head with what seemed to be honest amazement. No man, that was spot on. It took me years to figure out how my quirk works, and her quirk was always a mystery until her file came up. You have a talent for that, a really good talent in fact. And quat. Izuku waved a dismissive hand at him. It isn't anything major, I just studied a lot. But enough about that. What's been new with you in the last 2 days? And quat. The heir of fire paused with his thoughts and answered. Nothing much, I've had to pull back on the hero work on account of my son. My wife's been wanting to try out this new basket making hobby, which, usual for her. My kid is fine, but we're looking to enroll him in a preschool in a couple years, but Momo wants to homeschool, which I'm on the fence about. We can afford tutors, but I want him to grow up around other children and not be so socially awkward like I was. And quat. Izuku considered the statement for a bit and gave it a thought. Why not set up playdates? I know you're high profile in the hero game, but there's other people you could ask. Why not look up who needs their kids watched in the industry? You said you don't really need to do this for a living, but most people do and don't have the time to be full-time parents. That way you can help them out, get your son some friends and give your wife something to do. And quat. Todoroki put a hand to his chin in contemplation, seeming to think deeply about it. A daycare? That's not a bad idea. Momo would probably love it, but we'd need to wait until our kid turns 5 or so, since I read that was the best time to introduce them to socializing with peers. And quat. Izuku shot him a glance at how serious his one-off spur-of-the-moment idea was being taken. Honestly, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. Doesn't your wife have a mommy group she could join that helps watch kids? Make it into a semi-business venture where you hire mothers as caretakers to help her out, and you'd bring valuable services to overworked parents all over the industry. She's bound to love you for it. And quat. Todoroki turned and stared at him with such a deadpan, earnest expression that it was almost comical. Midoriya, I think you just helped me figure out my future. And quat. The weaker man laughed uncomfortably at being so praised. He even lowered his head a bit. Anytime man. And quat. The awkwardness was short-lived however, since in the next second the door sprang open and in walked Katsuki, dressed in a thick winter coat that was so dense and hot that Izuku could literally smell the nauseating stench of nitroglycerin from him. Regardless of his abominable stink, the number one smiled warmly at them both as if he genuinely was happy to see them. Well, if it isn't quiet and quieter, how are you both doing? And quat. There wasn't a chance to answer due to the blonde walking right up to Izuku and hugging him like they were related. He was so close that the smell was giving him a headache. The guy soon let go and lightly jabbed the third hero in the arm. Good to see you came icy hot. I thought you'd have to stay glued to ponytail with that whole being a parent thing. And quat. Todoroki shrugged indifferently and gestured to a table. I can make time when I'm able. They're both fine by the way. Anywho, we called you up because the reunion is 2 days from now and wanted to know if you needed any help with getting it organized. And quat. Katsuki laughed and wrapped his arm around Izuku's neck and rubbed his knuckles into the curls when he answered his equal. Ah, I'm fine. You know the commission and the academy float the bill. And quat. He shifted his attention downward and grinned. You however Deku, I want you to come on with me so I can introduce you to everybody. Then I plan for the both of us to get shit-faced, since I've never seen you drunk before. And quat. Izuku glared and sighed as he gripped the man's index finger hanging by his neck. I don't get drunk often, Kachan, I tend to get pissed when I am. Also, can you please let go of me? And quat. Katsuki paused at the still, firm force in the quirkless man's voice and lessened his grip when his finger was grabbed. A certain low panic played in his eyes, but it was banished when he laughed again. Oh come on Deku, what's the worst thing you could do? No offense, but you're not a whirlwind of destruction like me and hot and cold over here. And quat. Izuku paused, all the fury gone from him as self-consciousness filled him as he pursed his lips and considered his words. You don't want to know. And quat. Both the heroes raised an eyebrow at that, one far more jovial than the other. Ah come on Deku, you can tell me. What? Did you break something or scream at somebody? And quat. Again Izuku pursed his lips and inhaled as he saw one of his proudest, yet most horrifying moments. I don't want to talk about it. And quat. There was a firmness to his voice and an edge like split glass that was heard instantly, making the subject disappear like the dead. Katsuki still patted him on the back and grinned in spite of it. Alright then Deku, but you're still coming with me to this fucking thing this week. There's been too long where you haven't gotten to go and everybody's been asking about you. And quat. Izuku rolled his eyes as his mental strain lowered and answered begrudgingly, like he would when he was a teenager. Fine, it wasn't like I had a lot to do anyway, but just to let you know Kachan, I can't be there until after 4 p.m. on account of my job. And quat. The explosion user glared his annoyance and put some of the explosive energy in his voice through a low, tame way that didn't hint at any threat or what he usually would have said. Can't you just take a sick day or something? I can't really be hiring you out again and again since it makes for bad PR. Besides you have more than enough to fucking quit that shitty place, so what's the deal? And quat. Izuku threw his own annoyance at the blonde, but relented if only to keep the peace and avoid a pointless conflict, though a petulant part of him wanted to punch the guy, if only to not feel so damn subservient. Alright, I can take a day off. And quat. Likely seeing this conflict brewing, Todoroki cut in with his oddly soothing voice, taking the focus away from the issue. That aside, we still need to get everything in order. I'd hate to see a repeat of last year where nobody could figure out where the venue was. And quat. Katsuki waved a dismissive hand, only to have his fiery red eyes widen as what had to be an idea came to him, which only became worse when he gave a cunning grin that made Izuku feel so damn uncomfortable. That's already decided, we're heading back to the academy. But since Deku's coming along, how about we bring his girlfriend along with us? You know, introduce her to everybody and whatnot. And quat. Izuku heard this and instantly, almost spontaneously hid the sea of anxiety and fear it brought. In a strange way, since it was Katsuki saying it, he had a far easier time hiding the feelings, almost as if it was some inborn survival mechanism. He placed on the disinterested mask he wore 75% of the time and shrugged, sounding like it had no effect on him whatsoever. Sorry Kachan, but she doesn't do well in big crowds. Plus, she's got work that day, so that's not on the itinerary. And quat. The number one hero glared daggers at him as if he was honestly offended by the statement. If Izuku had been 10 years younger he likely would have crumpled and whimpered before such an expression from his tormentor. However, in his age he met it with bored indifference, which ran completely at odds with how hard, fast and worrying his heart was racing. Katsuki studied the sidekick's expression coldly, like one reviewing a crime scene, only to have that transform into what might be of concern. Then the demolition man turned his eyes to his half and half peer, only to find much the same expression as on his childhood friend. Blinking as what had to be the gears turning in his head, Katsuki flinched at whatever was going on inside and looked at the green-haired man with what might have been guilt, frustration, shame and defeat. His expression was one of supreme discomfort as he forced out an awkward smile that hurt to look at. Ah, okay then, that's completely okay. So, I'm gonna get going now, you two handle yourselves and, Deku, do you mind if I call you later tonight? And quat. Izuku fought the urge to let his emotions show as reflective guilt attacked him. Even if Katsuki was an asshole, seeing him suddenly become so reserved was hard. Still, he He met it with a smile and tried to be accommodating. Sure Ka-chan, that would be fine. And quat. The haze of neurotic emotion left the hero and he returned it with a relieved grin as he left the bar and let the remaining stoics to themselves. Instantly Izuku dropped his mask and pursed his lips in contention. Was I being a bit of a dick? And quat. Todoroki huffed at the statement. Taking into consideration your situation in life and who you're currently involved with, not at all. If Boom Boy gets upset then it's better than you and her being brought into a ceasefire, because believe me when I say this Midoriya, he will try to end her. And quat. Izuku shook his head in dismay at the state of things. I know and I'd do anything for her, but, there's no sense in being harsh when you're trying to keep things calm. And quat. The icy hero glared at him with a chilling fury that spoke of years of hurt and pain that carried in his words. Don't try to appease people who make your life harder, it'll only get worse until you either snap or you learn to stop caring about what they do. Like I say, you can't get blood from a stone and right now you're trying to let him bleed you. You don't owe him shit and you certainly aren't dependent on him, so stop thinking like you are. And quat. There were clearly a lot of pent-up feelings in those words, which was made clearer by how Todoroki seemed to be talking at him and not to him. However, Izuku managed to laugh a bit at the phrasing. You know that takes on a whole other meaning given my current relationship. And quat. Evidently the heir didn't find it humorous since he glared at him with disgusted, controlled fury that made it seem like he wronged him in some massive way, only for it to extinguish with a sigh as Todoroki clenched his fists over and over again to ease it out. I guess it does. And quat. He paused and shut his eyes for a moment before gauging his companion. Slowly the man softened his demeanor and turned to his usual disinterested self before speaking. Well, that accomplished most of what needed to be done, so I'm going home. The reunion starts at 6 p.m. I'll come get you by then, alright? And quat. Izuku nodded as he tried his best not to push any more buttons for anyone. Yeah, see ya Friday. And quat. The elemental hero nodded in response and left out the door without another word as his hands began to clench again, which left Izuku by his lonesome. Not sure what else to do and his worry about the state of his apartment coming back into the forefront, he went out the side entrance and made his way to the nearest train station. Nothing else entered his mind at the time it took to reach his stop, and in a strange way it was refreshing to not have his brain clouded with thoughts of the future, of the past and of Himiko. Rarely was he ever in the moment, even when doing something like pleasuring his lover. He had to think, to plan and judge if he was doing the proper thing for her sake. The only time he could remember such an anxiety-free time where he merely existed totally in the now was years ago in high school when he ran track with Aki by his side. As he stepped off the tram, a strange idea entered his mind and spontaneously Izuku moved off to the less crowded side and began to stretch until his muscles were properly warmed up. Once that was done, Izuku grinned a little and started to jog ever so quickly. Not exactly running track again, but close enough in a crowded city where he could bump into anyone. The wind rushed past his ears and made his eyes sting, but it felt good to relive an old memory that was actually good. Sure, he looked goofy, but it was mostly harmless and got him home quicker. Speaking of which, he was right in front of his building now, and soon he was in front of his door, and to his endless gratitude, the door was still locked. Entering past the door, he was greeted by a scene that wouldn't look out of place in a post-apocalypse movie with how much gray dust clung to everything like a blanket. It really had been over a month since he was here, wasn't it? Not one to dwell too long on it, he immediately headed to his room to check on one of his most prized possessions. After moving some clutter along, he saw that the yearbook was still intact and untouched, so that was one concern made pointless. With that seen too, he sat down on his bed and allowed his muscles to relax on the mattress. It felt good to simply be, yet as he did so, there came other thoughts he pushed aside for who knew how long. Namely, when was the last time he contacted his mother? Sure, they had a bit of a falling out, but it had to be, God, a year at the most. Was she alright? Was she pissed at him? Had she fucking disowned him? Okay, that last one was a bit much, but still it had been a while, and maybe making sure his mother was alive was a decent thing to do. Granted, it would likely come with a headache, yet what wasn't worth it for family? Sighing as he pulled out his phone, Izuku scrolled through his alarmingly large contact list and found his mother's number. Bracing himself, he hit it and put the device to his ear. It went to dial tone for a few scant seconds, then it connected and the voice that welcomed him into the world came through. Hello honey, is everything okay? And quat. Like that, an anvil of guilt slammed on his heart at her words, and he felt like such an asshole for ignoring her for so long. Yeah mom, everything's fine. I just wanted to check in on you since it's been a while. And quat. Almost immediately the warm, caring part of her voice vanished and was replaced with that snarky, judgmental tone he absolutely loathed. Well, it's a bit late for that, wouldn't you say? This is the first time I'm hearing from you in nearly a year, and not once before did you answer my calls or texts. I swear if it wasn't for Katsuki watching out for you, I'd have assumed you were dead. However, I don't hold that against you. Now, are you still with Himiko, or have you two broken up? And quat. Normally Izuku would have just ended the call right there, but he wanted to at least make an effort for his mother's sake. So he pushed the anger brewing inside him down and put on a pleasant face like he always did. We're still together and everything's good between us. Like I said, I just wanted to check on you after so long. Which makes me ask, is Aunt Mitsuki okay? ? And quote. Inko answered in that I know best way that grated even more on his nerves and made the situation that more unpleasant. Mitsuki's doing fine. Granted she's deep in her cups, but she isn't in trouble. You on the other hand have been worrying me to death, young man. I can't tell you how many nights I laid awake and scared that something horrible had happened to you. I want you to know I love you, Izuku, and that I'll always be here for you. But the relationship you've gotten involved in with that woman frightens me. It really does, and there's been countless studies done on people with her quirk subclass that do horrible things to others. And quote. She went on as a tangible panic entered her voice. There was this medical article published after the calamity over blood quirk user, and it was about this girl who was no older than 15 at the time who snapped and attacked one of her classmates with a box cutter out of some twisted view of love. That girl went on to torture and kill a bunch of people due to her quirk's influence on her mind, and I just don't want something like that to happen to you. And quote. He scowled and sighed in defeat, unsure what to say. She wasn't wrong that Himiko did fit that description during her youth, and he wouldn't be surprised if it was actually about her in that article given all he learned about her. Yet it didn't matter to him, but he's been with her so long that her little tics and madness seem so normal, that to a regular person he'd likely seem even nuttier than Himiko. Still he tried to be compassionate, if only to avoid a fight. I know, Mom, but not everyone's the same. Look at Vlad King or the countless other people with blood quirks in the medical field. They've been nothing but a boon to society, and you've told me how doctors with those quirks save lives. And quote. She paused and sighed. I get what you're saying, sweetie, but it's just out of every woman you could have picked, why that one? You never were this obscene any other time, and you just seem so trapped with how things are. Back when you in high school. And quote. He cut in harshly and coldly, not wanting to touch on that ever. Don't say it. Don't bring that up, please. And quote. The woman paused at his words and uttered another sigh that brought in some of that maternal warmth back to her voice. All right, I won't. But you were so much happier back then. Do you mind if I ask what you have planned with Himiko? What's going on between you both right now? ? And quote. Izuku hesitated for a moment before continuing to speak and hoping he would give too much away or cause another episode of hysteria. Well, things are good. She's been more centered, and I found out a lot about what she went through during the calamity, and that's made us closer. For the most part it's been static with how we're living, and that's fine. And quote. He paused and gathered himself before deciding that he can at least trust his mother to be honest. I found out that she did some violent things to people back in the day due to her quirk, and that she wasn't always on the straight and narrow, but despite all that, I'm still in love with her. She hasn't been abusive or violent or any of that, and no matter how hard I try I'm still madly enthralled by her. I know it's stupid and it's just my emotions talking, but in spite of it all, Mom, I think I want to marry this woman. And quote. He wasn't sure why he said what he did, perhaps because it was simply good to vent. However, instead of the swarm of guilt-tripping insults and sadness, his mother merely spoke in a calm, reluctant and oddly understanding tone. You sound just like me when I met your father. He was this broken soul that latched himself to me, and I wanted so badly to be the one to save him, to make him better. The heart isn't exactly logical, sweetie, and maybe if you were a girl I could give you more advice, but I understand that feeling of deep, burning love. It feels like your lungs are being crushed and all you want to do is scream and shout and embrace them, right? Like nothing can ever convey how deeply you feel. ? And quote. He blinked at the way his mother described it to a T. Yeah, Mom, when you and Dad were first together, how dangerous were your emotions? Did you ever look at them and know deep down you'd do anything for them? Anything? ? And quote. Inko laughed softly at that as if lost in some nostalgia. Oh honey, you have no idea. When your father and I were together I did anything for him. And this feeling you're having where you'd literally do anything, regardless if it was right or wrong, for them, you start to get possessive and think I owe it to them to protect them no matter what. That gets worse with time when you start to see anyone who might slight them as deserving of your wrath. I had it. And quote. She went on as if reliving her past. I was the clingy, possessive girlfriend that would occasionally whip someone's ass, and he was the distant bad boy nobody understood. I was young and stupid, but I was happy for a time until all of Hisashi's issues got the better of him and he filed for divorce after 7 years. Point being, I understand that urge to look at someone you genuinely love and just want to smother them until they're yours. We're very emotionally charged people, Izuku, and I'm sad to say you get it from me. You actually said the same about, I won't bring that up like you asked, but still. And quote. He leaned back against the wall and felt his body relax as he found someone who could translate what the hell was going on in his head. You hit the nail on the head. But, with Himiko, I adore her quality of character and strength and all that, but another part of it is because she's willing to accept my love. Like one of the main reasons why those girls you set me up with never worked out is because it was always so impersonal for me and them. I could never just throw myself at them without making them flee, so I stopped trying. But with Himiko I can admit to most insane declarations of passion and she'd accept it. Like I can just jam all the emotion pent up inside me through her and she'd love me just as hard. And quat. Another sympathetic laugh came from the line. I know exactly what you mean. Hisashi was a cold, distant man, but I could praise him until the sun went out and do everything for him and he wouldn't turn me away or leave. Like I said, our family is emotional and he actually sent 2 guys to the hospital for trying to touch me when we were young, so you get it from us both. It's a grand thing being in love and having that being returned, but don't let your emotions blind you to who you're with. Sometimes the heart can blind you to what's in front of you. And quat. A smile crossed his lips and he felt far better than he envisioned such a conversation would make him feel. I know mom, I'm gonna let you go now. Okay? And quat. Inko sounded likewise at ease and less of the snappy crone she usually was. Sure sweetie, do you mind if I come by to see you sometime? And quat. No problem, I love you. And quat. I love you too Izuku, I'll see you soon. And quat. With that the call ended and a weight had left Izuku's shoulders. He was free of the guilt that had been building in his mind and drank in that feeling, when suddenly his phone rang again and Katsuki of all people was calling. Needless to say this soured his mood as he answered. Hey Kachan, what's up? And quat. Nothing came from the line for a few seconds before the man himself spoke in a reluctant tone, as if he was holding back something to his throat. Hey Deku, sorry to bug you this early, but I want to apologize about how I acted back at the bar. I get that you're really touchy about your girlfriend and I wasn't really thinking so. Fuck. Be fucking honest with me here Deku, are you mad at me? Because I saw you do the exact same thing Icy Hot does when he's pissed and it worries me. And quat. For once Izuku gave a scoff and rolled his eyes. No Kachan, I'm not mad. I just didn't want to start an argument over nothing in the middle of public and you can be really brash at times, so I just figured it would be best for everyone not to upset you. And quat. A sharp inhale followed as the hero answered. Fuck, so that's how it is. Round face and spiky hair always said the same thing. I didn't mean to be a dick back there, I just don't get social cues at times, you know? And quat. Izuku shrugged, feeling indifferent like he usually did. It's just how you are Kachan. I get you're a little hard on the uptake, but it isn't like you tried to maim anybody, so no harm done. And quat. Another line came from the speaker that made him flinch. That doesn't make up for shit. And, Deku, do you remember those times back in middle school when I used my quirk on you? And quat. There was a stream of silence for a time before the quirkless man spoke up with steel in his voice. I'm gonna let you go now Kachan. I'll see you at the reunion, okay? And quat. It sounded sweet, but the quality and harshness to the tone translated it differently, and again the number 1 hero sounded weakened by it. Alright, I'll see you later on. Love you Deku. And quat. The call ended and Izuku had to stop himself from letting his anger consume him. It would serve no point, so he let it pass and he began to scroll through his contacts list to find someone to take his mind off it. Luckily he found just the one when he tapped Ochako's number. It had been a bit since they last talked and it only seemed right. After a few bits of dial tone her voice came through sounding like she had been exhausted for days. Hello? And quat. He tried to keep his spirits up and be as positive as he could for her sake. Hey Rosie, it's me. Are you doing okay? And quat. A pause came and with it a groan. No, I haven't been okay at fucking all. The commission just let me get back to work and I'm behind on a mountain of paperwork while all my friends are poking into my personal life because I'm not the shoulder for them to lean on anymore. Then I have to worry about Miko and her bullshit, along with how fucking Shoto is handling being her PO. And I just, fuck! And quat. She audibly rubbed her temples over the line. Just fuck it all, you know? All I did was choose to make one off the wall, an independent choice in my life, and everyone is attacking me. Sure, it wasn't my best idea, but at least it somewhat fucking works. I'm sorry I pushed you guys away for a while. I just needed to get my life in order before that. And quat. He raised a hand out of habit to calm her despite it being pointless. Hey, it's fine. All that matters is that you're okay. I thought about coming to see you with Himiko, but she said you wanted some space. That being said, can I do anything to help you feel better? And quat. She barked out the reply harshly like it was more of an insult than anything. Tell those fucking assholes to leave me alone and fuck off. Then get that crazy bitch of yours to calm down and walk over here so I can whip your fucking ass until I feel better. And quat. She inhaled and let the anger go. Shit, sorry about that. I've just had a really hard time of it lately and all I want to do is curse everybody out. It isn't because of you or Miko, but you're the only two who can't royally mess up my life right now. And quat. He shrugged in sympathy. Hey, I understand. It's no different than what everybody else goes through. Look, I've been invited to this reunion thing by a few people, and since we'll be close by, how about you just crash at Himiko's place with me and we'll do something special for you. And quat. She sounded relieved at the idea. That sounds like exactly what I need. But I've been a bit of a bitch, so is there anything you want to tell me? Is everything okay? And quat. He pursed his lips at that and sucked in air through his teeth. Do you mind if I say something that might upset you? And quat. Annoyance rattled through her voice when she answered. Yes, but it needs to be said, so go ahead. And quat. He formulated the best way to explain it and slowly let it out. You remember how you asked me a while ago if I knew the name of the group she used to be in? I found it out a few days ago, along with her real name. Everything's cool between us and I'm keeping it a secret, but I figured you should know. And quat. Nothing came from the line for 2 solid minutes until the heroine responded with what sounded like mild astonishment. You learned who she was, what she did and what group she was in, and you're still with her. I think Miko made the right choice with you. But, you really know her entire record? All of it? Do you need to talk about this or something? And quat. Perplexion filled his expression and Izuku answered with a hint of confused indignation. Not at the moment. I don't see what's so hard to believe. She was a different person back then, and even if she is a little disturbed now, she's still Himiko regardless of that. And quat. Perplexion now entered her voice in an almost reluctant way. Alright, but I want you to know I'm here if you ever need to talk. And quat. He grinned at her words. I know. The same applies to me if you ever need anything. And quat. Again those astonished emotions were there in voice. Thanks Zuki, but I'm gonna go sort myself out for a while. I'll see you and Miko later on this week. Love you. And quat. He let a bit of warmth enter his heart to her declaration. Love you too, Rosie. Seconds later the call ended and he had only one more left to make, one which would be far easier than the others. Hitting up the name at the top, he waited until the call connected and he heard his lover's sweet voice. Hey Zuzu, what's up? And quat. A certain whimsy found him at hearing her speak, like he had been hit with a nice dose of something, and he heard it in his tone. Not much. I just wanted to tell you that I won't be stopping over at your place tonight since I've been away from mine for so long and I want to get everything in order. And quat. There was an overt tone of disappointment in her response. Oh, how about I come over to your place instead? It wouldn't be too much trouble, would it? And quat. He cringed at the suppression of desperate hope in her words and tried not to be too insensitive. It's kind of late and I have work in the morning, plus I'm likely going to be pulled into planning this reunion thing tomorrow, so I'm gonna be busy. So you might not see me for the next 2 days, but after Friday I'll be there with Ochako and we'll have a good time. Okay? And quat. That barely had the effect he wished and it showed. Just those 2 days, right? You'll be back on Saturday? And quat. He gritted his teeth at how she said it and tested his words. Yes, I'll be back on Saturday after I'm done with all this. I'll give you my word. And quat. She paused with a sprinkle of something he didn't like. Can I text you while you're away? And quat. Again he raked out a smile to ease himself from the coal nesting in his chest. Sure, but like I said, it'll only be for a little while. And quat. She said nothing for a time. Okay Zuzu, I love you. And quat. Once more guilt weighed fresh on him as he pictured the turmoil in her heart and how much he felt it himself. I love you too.